Chapter 842. Inside the divine desolate mystery realm, one could not feel the passage of time because there was no day or night. Another desolate beast had died under Chu Mu's sword. This made Chu Mu sigh, because killing this desolate beast had used up about 80% of his strength. 80% of his strength was enough to match or even surpass a peak Deshang swordsman in the God Condensation realm. No wonder it was said that it was best to be in the God Condensation realm to enter this place. If a primary realm swordsman encountered a desolate beast here, they would probably be torn to pieces. Chu Mu was an exception. His cultivation was in the primary realm, but his strength was enough to match a peak God Condensation realm expert and even kill one. Advancing forward, unknowingly, large amounts of desolate stones and spiritual herbs, as well as desolate beast crystals had appeared in his interspatial ring. The seemingly unreachable mountain was also gradually approaching. The desolate mountain range was very tall. Looking up, one could see no end. In the sky, there was a yellowish-brown aura circling around, as if it was a cloud. When Chu Mu arrived at the foot of the mountain, Ho Qingming and the other 30 inner disciples had also arrived. They were a little surprised. Why was it that the closer they got to the mountain, the stronger the call in their hearts? But at a glance, they could not see any mysteries. With a thought, Chu Mu immediately leaped up. After leaping about 1,000 meters, Chu Mu saw an altar with a diameter of 10 meters. It was the same as the altar in the divine desolate mystery realm, except it was much smaller. The altar was empty, but it had an inexplicable attractive force that made people walk over. Chu Mu observed his surroundings for a while, and did not discover any danger. He took a step forward and stepped onto the altar, walking into it. Just as he stood there, a force rose up from below, locking onto Chu Mu's body. Chu Mu was unable to resist. The force did not have any evil intentions, but it swept through Chu Mu's body, as if it was searching for something. After about 3 breaths, the force returned and Chu Mu regained his ability to move. The surrounding scene instantly changed, as if he had been teleported. He appeared in a sealed space that could be infinitely big or small. In fact, Chu Mu had been staying on the altar all this time. The atmosphere was a little strange. In front of Chu Mu, a figure was forming. Not long after, a person who looked exactly like Chu Mu appeared and stood in front of Chu Mu. They looked the same and wore the same clothes, but their eyes were a little stiff and lifeless. The Chu Mu in front of him was emitting an aura fluctuation. He was at the peak of the origin realm, the same level as Chu Mu. However, Yi Futian did not know how strong he was. However, he would soon find out. Chu Mu pulled out his sword light, which was as bright as thunder, and slashed toward Chu Mu. The swordsmanship was simple, sharp, fast, and very effective. It showed the powerful strength of Chu Mu, but in Chu Mu's eyes it was not enough. Without dodging, Chu Mu faced the sword light head-on. The sword light was faintly discernible as it counterattacked, piercing the opponent's throat and killing him. In the blink of an eye, the figure in front of Chu Mu quickly faded until it disappeared. There was nothing left. Soon after, the surroundings seemed to have been teleported again. The sealed space disappeared and returned to normal. Chu Mu was still standing on the altar. Chu Mu did not understand why he had easily killed his opponent, but he did not gain anything. However, he still left the altar and continued to climb. At 2,000 meters, Chu Mu saw another altar. This one was bigger, with a diameter of 20 meters. After thinking for a while, Chu Mu walked into the center of the altar. There were many other altars on the mountainside, one after another. Counting carefully, there were exactly 31 altars every 1,000 meters, corresponding to the 31 people that had entered the divine desolate mystic realm. Just like before, Chu Mu also felt a power lock onto his body. After scanning him, it was as if he had been teleported into another sealed space. In front of him, there was another him. This person's aura fluctuations were even stronger than the first one. It was almost at the divine condensation realm. It could be said that he was half a step into the divine condensation realm. He was still the first to attack Chu Mu. His sword speed was faster, sharper, and more powerful. However, in Chu Mu's eyes, it was still not enough. The flaws were obvious. The sword's trajectory was vague and fleeting, silently killing his opponent. The figure disappeared, but there was still nothing. After leaving the altar, Chu Mu continued up the mountain. At 3,000 meters, he found another altar that was 30 meters in diameter. Chu Mu almost understood the pattern. The bigger the altar, the stronger the opponent. This time, it might be an opponent at the divine condensation realm. Walking into the altar, Chu Mu was once again locked onto by a power. He was unable to move, but he did not panic. This was because he already knew that the purpose of this power was to scan his body, to find out his cultivation and physical strength, and to arrange a suitable opponent for him. The first altar was 10 meters in diameter. His opponent's cultivation and physical strength were exactly the same as his. The second altar was 20 meters in diameter. His opponent's cultivation and physical strength were higher than his, at the half-step divine condensation realm. Now it was the third altar, 30 meters in diameter. Entering the sealed space again, another person appeared in front of Chu Mu. This person was the same as him, but the aura fluctuations he emitted were at the divine condensation realm. His physical strength was also at the initial third level of the heavenly desolate sword body. It was obvious that he was stronger than Chu Mu. Once again, he attacked Chu Mu. As the sword light flickered, Chu Mu could tell that this person's swordsmanship was better than the second one's. However, with his cultivation at the beginning of the divine condensation realm, while his sword technique was decent, it was still not enough. His sword also contained the impact of his divine sense. Indeed, he could easily kill an ultimate origin realm swordsman, but he was still not Chu Mu's opponent. Unsurprisingly, Chu Mu still killed his opponent with one strike. The third altar was still empty. Chu Mu did not understand what these altars were for. Zhao Fu continued up the mountain until he reached the 4,000-meter mark, where he saw countless yellow-brown clouds and mist. There was yet another altar that was 50 meters wide, and its color was a bit deeper than the previous 3 altars. The aura it gave off was even more profound and ancient. Stepping into the altar, Chu Mu was once again locked down by energy and entered the sealed space. However, no opponent appeared in front of him. Instead, a voice sounded. "Cultivators have entered the trial altar. The divine wilderness trial is about to begin. Defeat your opponent and you will be rewarded. If you fail, you will be sent out of the divine wilderness." The voice was cold, but the content shocked Chu Mu. "If you are not willing to accept the trial, you can shout and leave." Trial altar? Divine wilderness trial? In other words, the previous 3 altars were just tests to see if those who entered the divine wilderness had the qualifications to enter the trial altar, and if they had the qualifications to start the divine wilderness trial. Next, it was time for Chu Mu to choose. How strong his opponent would be, Chu Mu did not know. If his opponent defeated him, he might be killed and be sent out of the divine wilderness. This time, Chu Mu did not leave. After 10 breaths of time, a figure appeared in front of him. It was completely different from Chu Mu. It was another person. However, the aura this person emitted had reached the small success of the divine condensation realm. His sky-desolate sword body had also reached the middle stages. Such an opponent was clearly stronger than the one on the third altar. If one considered his sword techniques and spiritual sense, he would definitely be much stronger. When he drew his sword, the sword light instantly cut through the darkness of the sealed space, leaving behind a faint trail. The killing intent was cold and sharp. That aura seemed as if it wanted to tear Chu Mu apart. Once an expert made a move, one would know whether or not they were skilled. The opponent in front of him was indeed a level stronger than the one on the third altar. He was even stronger than a normal small success divine condensation realm cultivator. However, such strength was still not enough for Chu Mu. True geniuses could challenge those of a higher rank and kill their opponent. Chu Mu was not only a true genius but also a monster. Not only could he kill opponents of a higher rank than him, he could also kill opponents of a higher rank than him. It was simply unbelievable. It must be known that an extreme origin realm cultivator who could fight against a divine condensation realm cultivator was already considered a top genius. To be able to kill such a cultivator was a rare genius that only appeared once in 1,000 years. For someone like Chu Mu, who was at the extreme origin realm, to fight against an extreme divine condensation realm cultivator was unprecedented and unimaginable. Shifting his feet, he easily dodged his opponent's sword light. His opponent's sword techniques were extraordinary and his reaction was fast. Swish, 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 swish. The sword light was continuous and surrounded Chu Mu's body. Chu Mu was as agile as a fish in water. As he dodged, he drew his sword and slashed his opponent's throat, killing him. Although his opponent was a virtual character, it was set up the same as a real person. If his vitals were hit, he would still die. After easily killing his opponent's figure quickly faded before his eyes until it disappeared. Trial taker, do you wish to proceed to the second stage of the trial? If you choose yes, the second stage of the trial will begin. The reward will be given out at the end of the trial. The cold voice sounded again. Yes. Chu Mu did not hesitate. Defeating an opponent who was only at the initial stage of the divine condensation realm was so easy. Presumably, the reward would not be anything good. After making his choice, the second stage of the trial began. Another opponent appeared in front of him. It was an unfamiliar face, but the aura he exuded was that of a divine condensation realm Deshang. His sky-barren sword body had also reached the late stage. Overall, he was at least 3 times stronger than his opponent in the first stage of the trial. He was even stronger than an average Deshang cultivator in the divine condensation realm. Kill. The sword light was like water, unceasingly coming for the kill. In an instant, it transformed into a towering tree, crushing everything in its path. This move displayed the opponent's extraordinary swordsmanship attainments and outstanding combat skills. He was not just a little stronger than an average Deshang cultivator in the divine condensation realm, but more than twice as strong. The sword light whistled as it approached. Chu Mu only took a step back and did not draw his sword. While dodging, he began to circle around his opponent. He felt that this opponent's swordsmanship was not bad and was worth learning. After learning, Chu Mu drew his sword and killed his opponent. Chapter 843. After passing the second trial, the cold voice sounded again, allowing Chu Mu to choose whether to enter the third trial or to end the trial. According to the rules of the trial, every time one passed a trial, they would receive a corresponding unknown reward. If the trial ended after passing a certain trial, the reward would be summed up and given out together. But if the trial ended after being killed by the opponent, they would receive nothing. Therefore, this trial was also a gamble. It was a gamble on one's mentality, and more importantly, one's strength. Chu Mu did not hesitate to enter the next trial. In the third trial, his opponent was another person. It was a middle-aged swordsman with an expressionless face. When he appeared, he unsheathed his sword and attacked. The third trial's opponent's cultivation had reached the great circle of the divine condensation realm. The third level of the desolate sky sword physique had also reached the great circle. His attainment in sword arts was even higher, and his strength was extremely powerful. However, this opponent's sword intent and profound were only at the peak of the 6th revolution, while Chu Mu was at the peak of the 8th revolution. This was also one of the reasons why he could repeatedly challenge stronger opponents and defeat stronger opponents. Fight. Such a strong opponent brought a trace of pressure to Chu Mu, forcing Chu Mu to use his true strength to deal with it. This opponent's sword arts were very strong. After his sword stabbed out, it was like a flash flood. The momentum was vast and earth-shattering, as if it was going to destroy the world. Different swordsmen had different sword attacks. Even if it was the same sword stabbing out, there would be obvious differences. Some were silent, some were unpredictable, some were as fast as lightning, and some were like the sword in front of him. They focused on momentum and used momentum to suppress the opponent. Ordinary opponents would collapse under such momentum, not to mention fighting. The flash flood made Chu Mu's expression turn serious. He unsheathed the 8-sided desolate sky sword and aimed at the opponent's weakness. Sword arts that focused on momentum were usually wide open and had fewer changes. Relatively speaking, the weakness would be more obvious, but the weakness would be covered by the strong momentum. And when momentum could not affect the opponent, the weakness would be discovered and used. Although there were few changes, it didn't mean that there were no changes. Chu Mu's opponent's sword style instantly changed, and the erupting mountain torrent instantly stopped. Shortly after, it seemed to have become the water of the Milky Way of the 9 heavens, surging endlessly, crashing down and drowning the earth. His movements were bold and powerful, and his momentum was astonishing. The water of the Milky Way of the 9 heavens that came crashing down became even stronger in an instant. Strong winds blew and waves surged violently. The middle-aged swordsman unleashed his swordsmanship. The sword in his hand seemed to transform into a long river. It felt as though he was holding one end of the river and dancing it. Chu Mu's figure leaped and swam in the river, avoiding the opponent's sword. From time to time, he would counterattack with his sword, aiming for the opponent's weak point. In terms of swordsmanship, his opponent still couldn't compare with Chu Mu, but his absolute power was many times stronger than Chu Mu's. Under the long river swordsmanship, Chu Mu felt as though he was on the verge of collapse. However, he still managed to dodge one sword after another, absorbing the essence of his opponent's swordsmanship and observing his fighting style and technique. After 15 minutes, the middle-aged swordsman couldn't do anything to Chu Mu, and Chu Mu also couldn't form an effective counterattack. The middle-aged swordsman didn't have the slightest bit of impatience and continued to attack again and again. However, Chu Mu was already familiar with his fighting style, and the flaws in his opponent's eyes became clearer and clearer in Chu Mu's eyes. The peak 8th Revolution Sword Intent and the 8th Revolution Gold Profound erupted and merged into his sword. His tyrannical spiritual force clashed with the opponent's divine sense, and he slashed out with his sword. In an instant, Chu Mu's figure flickered, and in the river of swordsmanship, he rode the wind and broke through the waves. He went against the current and crossed paths with the middle-aged swordsman. Sword light flickered and slashed across the middle-aged swordsman's throat, cutting it in half. Blood spurted out like a fountain. The third trial passed. "Do you want to continue with the fourth trial?" The cold voice sounded again. It seemed to have a certain level of intelligence, and wasn't repeating the original words. "Continue," Chu Mu replied decisively. The opponent for the third trial had already reached the level of complete divine condensation realm. He didn't know how strong the opponent for the fourth trial would be. Very soon, Chu Mu found out. The opponent for the fourth trial was another person. The aura he emitted told Chu Mu that his cultivation had reached the limit of the divine condensation realm, and the third level of the heavenly desolate sword physique had also reached the limit. An extremely tyrannical opponent with even more brilliant swordsmanship was enough to make one feel despair. A year ago, Chu Mu would definitely be unable to contend against him. However, the current Chu Mu had the ability to fight, because his strength was much stronger than a year ago. The opponent for the fourth trial was a female swordsman. Her sword was thinner and softer. Although she hadn't made a move yet, Chu Mu had some understanding of her fighting style. As expected, the moment she drew her sword, the sword light shot out like silk, forming a sword net that enveloped Chu Mu. Every silk-like sword light was extremely tough and sharp, as if it could cut through everything. Chu Mu's figure disappeared in a flash, leaving the sword net, and attacked from the side. This opponent's swordsmanship didn't focus on aura, but on technique. It was ever-changing, mysterious, and endless. It didn't say which style of swordsmanship was stronger. The difference was in the swordsman and the person who used the sword. Chu Mu's opponent, this female swordsman, once her swordsmanship was unleashed, it was endless, without any pause. The sword seemed to have been given life. She used all kinds of combo techniques, continuously attacking, and attacking. While Chu Mu was fighting, there were also battles in the other trial altars. It was an intense battle. The opponents in the trial altars were determined according to the cultivator's cultivation level. Those who could enter the divine desolate mystic realm were true geniuses. And true geniuses could challenge those above their level. They could easily kill ordinary swordsmen of a higher level, and they could even kill some genius swordsmen. The 30 inner palace disciples that entered here had all passed the trial and entered the true trial altars. Their opponents were stronger than them in terms of cultivation level, physical strength, and other aspects. Battle was about using one's own advantages, mobilizing all of one's strength, and grasping the best opportunity to kill the opponent. Strength did not guarantee victory, unless the gap was so great that it made one despair. Otherwise, technique and the grasp of timing were extremely important. There were a total of 31 trial altars. More than a dozen altars flashed, and the sealed space disappeared. Following that, the altars also disappeared, leaving behind only a few people. They were the swordsmen that had passed the first trial and did not continue on to the second trial. As for the other 10 or so, they had passed the first trial and entered the second trial. They were killed and sent out of the divine desolate mystic realm. They were all geniuses, but to enter the third trial, there were 3 altars of 10, 20, and 30 meters in diameter. The first opponent's cultivation level was the same as theirs, and the second and third opponents were even stronger. To be able to pass the trial proved their strength. At the beginning of the trial, the opponents in the first trial were much stronger than the opponents in the 30-meter diameter altars. To be able to pass the first trial proved that they were true geniuses, absolute geniuses. The opponents in the second trial were even stronger, so it was normal for them to be killed. There were still more than a dozen people in the trial. Their progress was slower than Chu Mu's. This was because they were only in the second trial, while Chu Mu had already begun the fourth trial. Various profound meanings were used. This was a technique that Chu Mu had comprehended in the past year of cultivation. Although the various profound meanings were inferior to the profound meanings of metal, the profound meanings of metal were more focused on sharpness. In terms of movement techniques, it was definitely inferior to the profound meanings of space. Different profound meanings had different usages. If used properly, it could even be a miracle. Within the sealed space, there were countless sword light. Strands of silk-like sword light weaved together like countless silkworms. They crisscrossed, almost covering the entire sealed space. Chu Mu was like prey in the sword net. Dodging, constantly dodging. Chu Mu felt that his movement technique had improved. It was rare and commendable. He decided not to counterattack for the time being. Instead, he cultivated his own movement technique. It was still called the Flying Swan Illusory Void Steps, but compared to when it was first created, it had undergone several qualitative changes. The powerful pressure also gave Chu Mu a great motivation. The motivation to move forward was slowly unlocking his potential. After reaching his limit, Chu Mu began to counterattack. His opponent was very strong. Chu Mu could no longer defeat her easily. In an instant, Chu Mu seized the opportunity and unleashed a powerful attack. 3 styles of heavenly desolation. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 3 consecutive sword moves, stabbing, chopping, and slashing, connected perfectly. These three sword moves could be said to be the essence of Chu Mu's Heavenly Desolation sword technique. The first 33 styles of the Heavenly Desolation sword technique were combined into one sword move. The middle 33 styles were combined into one sword move, and the last 33 styles were combined into one sword move. Furthermore, they were combined into one sword move of the initial boundary realm, advanced boundary realm, and extreme boundary realm to form a combo. This was something even Nan Wu couldn't do. Chu Mu was already ahead of him. Under the Heavenly Desolation 3 styles, Chu Mu's opponent couldn't resist at all. That tyrannical power, the eruption of peak 8th rank sword intent and gold profound, the terrifying mental intent impact, the activation of the peak mountain shaking energy, and so on. A torrent of energy directly penetrated through. Kill. It was unstoppable. The opponent was sent flying and half of his body was shattered. His opponent was dead and disappeared. Chu Mu passed the 4th trial. Do you want to continue with the 5th trial? The cold voice sounded again. Chu Mu thought for a while. The opponent of the 4th trial was already very strong. However, Chu Mu had not unleashed all of his power. In other words, Chu Mu could still be stronger. Continue, Chu Mu said. As soon as the voice sounded, all the power that he had consumed was restored. A figure appeared in front of him again. Most of the swordsmen in the other altars had already left. Only Ho Qingming and Chu Mu were still in the trial. However, no one knew about Chu Mu. The rest of the people in the 7-sword tower surrounded Ho Qingming's trial altar, waiting for him to appear. Ho Qingming was fighting fiercely with his opponent in the 3rd trial in the altar. He was in a difficult situation. Chapter 844. The strength of the 5th trial's opponent was shocking. Under his opponent's attacks, Chu Mu felt as if he could not breathe. For a moment, he could not find a chance to strike fast. The speed of his opponent's sword in the 5th trial was extremely fast. It was like streaks of light shuttling back and forth. This was the fastest sword speed that Chu Mu had ever seen. This opponent's cultivation was also at the limit of the divine condensation stage. His 3rd level of the Heavenly Desolate sword body had also reached the limit. It was the same as the 4th trial, but his swordsmanship was even more profound. Moreover, his sword will had reached the limit of the 7th revolution, and his profound was the profound of light. Fortunately, it was only at the limit of the 6th revolution. A terrifying opponent. His strength was enough to make one feel despair. Under his opponent's endless attacks, Chu Mu could only dodge time and time again. Every time, he felt that his reaction was not fast enough. Under such extreme sword speed, Chu Mu could not find a chance to counterattack. Even if he knew that the 3 moves of the Heavenly Desolate sword body were enough to kill his opponent, the problem was that he could not find the best time to use the 3 moves of the Heavenly Desolate sword body. He had to improve himself and lower his opponent's speed in order to have a chance. Otherwise, even if Chu Mu's swordsmanship was above his opponent's, his sword speed was far inferior to his opponent's. Moreover, the difference in absolute strength was also huge. He only surpassed his opponent in sword intent and profound. If not for his sword will and profound, Chu Mu would not have the ability to fight with his opponent. The current situation was precarious. Chu Mu did indeed have the strength to kill ordinary divine condensation stage swordsmen, but his opponent was at the limit of the divine condensation stage. The 3rd level of the Heavenly Desolate sword body had also reached the limit, and his sword will had reached the limit of the 7th revolution. In all aspects, he surpassed ordinary divine condensation stage swordsmen. He was at the level of a genius. Under the frenzied attacks, the speed of his opponent's sword seemed to constantly increase. Chu Mu's dodging gradually became more and more difficult. The pressure on him was increasing. He could not be sure if he would be hit if this continued. Such a high-speed sword, such a strong power, if he was hit, his defeat was inevitable. He would gain nothing. As this thought flashed through his mind, Chu Mu clenched his teeth and directly used the burning blood transformation. The blood essence converged, collided, and created sparks. The high temperature ignited the blood essence. In an instant, a terrifying power surged out from the burning blood essence. It was like a flood bursting through a dam. It swept through the entire body, and the tyrannical power grew more and more vigorous. Large success burning blood transformation immediately caused Chu Mu's strength to increase by 2 times, increasing to 3 times his original strength. His perception also increased accordingly. The sword's trajectory, which was originally difficult to detect, began to become visible, even though it was still somewhat blurry. As he dodged, Chu Mu was no longer in such a sorry state. Instead, he looked calm. Deshang's burning blood transformation gave him an increase in all aspects, even though it wasn't much. Following that, after dodging a few more times, Chu Mu found the perfect opportunity to counterattack. After entering the divine desolate mystic realm, he had not used the Ice Soul Frost technique. Now, he instantly activated it. The tyrannical power of ice poured into the 8-sided desolate heaven sword, causing it to be covered in a layer of frost. It was the Ice Soul Freezing Frost technique that had reached the large success stage. Furthermore, it had been cultivated with the help of the extreme ice elixir. The power of the Ice Soul Freezing Frost technique was many times stronger than before. The sword stabbed out. This sword was very slow, but the surrounding air and light were distorted. The power of the peak of the 8th level of the sword technique domain was displayed to the extreme. A sliver of weakness under Chu Mu's counterattack was instantly magnified. The opponent's extremely fast sword, which was like an aurora, paused for a moment. It was slightly pulled to the side, causing the opening to widen even more. Chu Mu's sword speed suddenly increased, exploding at the limit of the divine desolate realm. It silently arrived. This sword should have pierced the opponent's heart. However, this person's strength was indeed very strong. His reaction was also extremely fast. He immediately blocked Chu Mu's sword with the body of his sword. The power of the divine desolate realm was instantly released. Together with the tyrannical power of ice, it caused the opponent to take 3 steps back. A layer of frost quickly spread, covering the sword and the palm. It even spread towards the arm. Chu Mu knew that his ice power could not freeze the opponent for a long time. Perhaps it would only last for a moment. He had to grab hold of this rare opportunity. Strike. Chu Mu was not stingy with the power of the Ice Soul Frost technique. Even if it was not easy to recover at this moment, he used everything he had to display it. The speed of the sword almost exceeded his own limits. In an instant, 3 strikes were made. Chu Mu felt as if his arm muscles were about to be torn apart. He felt a burst of pain. After 3 strikes, Chu Mu's ice power was completely exhausted. The frost on the opponent's arm became thicker and thicker. For a moment, the opponent was unable to counterattack. He could only use his own strength to destroy the ice power. Taking a deep breath and enduring the pain in his arm, Chu Mu struck again. 3 styles of heavenly desolation. Stab, chop, chop. 3 moves in an instant. The power of the divine desolate realm, the power of the divine desolate realm, and the power of the divine desolate realm erupted one after another. The 3 moves were perfect. The 3 moves all landed on the opponent's body, causing him to retreat continuously. His body was injured and blood spurted out. However, he did not die. The ice power on the sword and arm disappeared and he counterattacked. Although it was not as fast as before, it still gave Chu Mu a fatal pressure. Gritting his teeth, he struck again. This time, Chu Mu used the power of the Earth Core Desolate Flame. This was the first time Chu Mu used the power of the Earth Core Desolate Flame in a battle. The Earth Core Desolate Flame, which was originally bigger than a duck's egg, lost half of its power and its color became lighter. The Earth Core Desolate Flame turned into a sword light and slashed out. Chu Mu twisted his body. With a poochie sound, Chu Mu's shoulder was pierced by the opponent's sword. The pain spread throughout his body, and he broke out in cold sweat. The opponent was also hit by the earth core desolate flame sword light and immediately burned. Heavily injured and hit by the earth core desolate flame, the strong opponent was burned to ashes in a short time in front of Chu Mu's eyes. With such a strong opponent finally dead, Chu Mu could not help but let out a sigh of relief. After using all his means and holding nothing back to kill the opponent, Chu Mu felt a little tired. "Do you want to continue with the 6th stage?" The cold voice sounded again. "No." Chu Mu thought for a breath and made his decision. The opponent in the 5th stage was already so strong. Then what about the 6th stage? Had his sword intent reached the 8th revolution? Or had his cultivation broken through to the divine condensation realm? Chu Mu did not know, but he was not willing to try. The opponent in the 5th stage had already made him use all his strength. According to the rules, the opponent in the 6th stage would be even stronger. He did not have the slightest confidence to fight against it. After making his choice, a wave of energy descended. Chu Mu's exhausted energy was immediately restored. The wound on his shoulder was also healed. Even the essence blood that was burned by Deshang's burning blood transformation was restored to its original state. Chu Mu checked his body in disbelief. The ice soul power that he had used up was completely restored. The earth core desolate flame that had used up half of its power was also completely restored. It was too magical. The sealed space had not disappeared yet. In front of Chu Mu, 5 balls of light appeared. "Cultivator has passed the 5th stage. You have received 5 rewards. Please accept them." The cold voice sounded again. Chu Mu hurriedly kept the 5 balls of light in front of him into his interspatial ring. He planned to check them later. What kind of rewards were they? After the balls of light disappeared, the sealed space also disappeared. Chu Mu appeared on the altar once again. Then, the altar disappeared as well. He did not know how long he had stayed in the trial altar. Nothing had changed in the outside world. There was no one around because Chu Mu had taken a different path from the other inner palace disciples. Immediately, Chu Mu sat down cross-legged. He did not cultivate. Instead, he meditated on the battles in the trial altar. The first 3 stages of the trial were nothing. He had already digested the battles. The 4th and 5th stages were the most important. The opponents in these 2 trials were very strong and brought pressure to Chu Mu. Especially the opponent in the 5th trial, who was extremely strong. Chu Mu had no choice but to use all of his strength in order to defeat his opponent. There was even a trace of luck involved in this. If he had to fight a second time, Chu Mu did not have full confidence that he could succeed. Not long after, Chu Mu slowly absorbed the gains from the 4th stage. He started to replay the battle in the 5th stage. Every scene appeared clearly in his mind. Then, he slowly comprehended. This was the most difficult battle that Chu Mu had encountered so far. It was also an extremely valuable battle. After a few hours, Chu Mu woke up from his meditation. He had successfully absorbed the gains from the battle and turned them into his own. There was no doubt that his footwork and body movement had improved. The speed of his sword had also surpassed the limit and increased by 1 point. The most important thing was, Chu Mu drew his sword and activated the sword principle realm. Instantly, the air within a 9-meter radius around the sword was distorted. This was the 9th level of the sword principle realm. The improvement of his footwork, body movement, and swordsmanship had increased Chu Mu's strength. At his level, it was very difficult for his strength to increase as long as his sword principle ultimacy and cultivation did not change. Since he had finished his meditation and absorbed the gains for his own use, Chu Mu was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he prepared to check on his rewards. The altar trial had a reward for every stage. Chu Mu had passed 5 stages and his reward was 5. Because he was wrapped in the light, he did not know what the rewards were. I hope it's not too bad. It's better if it's useful to me. Chu Mu thought to himself. After all, speaking of which, The trial's difficulty was extremely high. Before the trial began, Chu-Mu found it hard to imagine that each trial's difficulty would be so great. Because of this, he felt that the rewards after passing the trial would not be bad. It might even be a treasure. After all, this was the divine wilderness mystery land. While Chu-Mu was checking on his rewards elsewhere, Ho Qingming had also finished his trial. The trial altar had disappeared. Among the 30 inner disciples, his trial results were the best. Chapter 845. The 5 balls of light were taken out by Chu-Mu one by one according to the order of receiving them. Chu-Mu didn't know which one was the reward for the first stage and which was the reward for the 5th stage. It was just a feeling. The ball of light was actually a layer of protective film. Under Chu-Mu's power, the ball of light shattered, revealing the item within. At the same time, a message entered Chu-Mu's mind. It was a bottle. It was yellowish-brown in color, and it wasn't made of jade, but some kind of stone. The bottle was filled with a liquid called the Desolate Sky Body Refining Liquid. According to the description of the information that entered his mind, the Desolate Sky Body Refining Liquid was actually a liquid that assisted the cultivation of the Desolate Sky Sword Body. It was a special liquid that corresponded to the 3rd level of the Desolate Sky Sword Body. It could be cultivated to the 3rd level of the Desolate Sky Sword Body in a short period of time. Desolate Sky Body Refining Liquid. Is this the reward for the 1st stage or the 5th stage? Chu-Mu thought to himself as he stored the yellowish-brown bottle into his interspatial ring. If the Desolate Sky Body Refining Liquid was the reward for the 1st stage, then Chu-Mu was looking forward to the rewards for the next stage. It would definitely be better. If the Desolate Sky Body Refining Liquid was the reward for the 5th stage, then Chu-Mu didn't have much hope for the next 4 balls of light. It was purely a feeling. Taking out the 2nd ball of light according to the order, Chu-Mu was a little nervous. He crushed the ball of light, and at the same time, a message flowed into his mind. It was a black jade bottle with a smooth surface. Chu-Mu held it in his hand and it was very comfortable. It was obviously a rare good jade. Opening the bottle, there was no smell. But there was something inside. Pouring it into his palm, it was a pill. It was a black pill, so black that it seemed to absorb the surrounding light. The pill's surroundings were a little dim. The black pill wasn't big, about the size of a longan core. It was also very light. The message that entered his mind allowed Chu-Mu to know what pill it was. Great Soul Pill. Hearing the name, it was a little imposing. The introduction of the message made Chu-Mu feel pleasantly surprised. This was a very precious pill. It could not increase one's cultivation, nor could it increase one's perception. It could not increase the strength of one's spiritual will, but it was many times more precious than the Heaven Comprehension Pill because its use was to repair the soul. The soul had always been a very mysterious domain. Generations of swordsmen had spent a lot of time researching it, but they had not completely understood it. Injuries to the soul had always been the most troublesome. However, the soul was extremely important. Once the soul was damaged, it would definitely bring about negative or even negative consequences. Although there weren't many cases where one's soul was damaged, once it was damaged, it was almost impossible to heal. The only use of the Great Soul Pill was to heal the damage to the soul. Perhaps Chu-Mu might not necessarily need it, but it was better to be prepared. Furthermore, the Great Soul Pill was too valuable. If he kept it for later exchange, he would be able to exchange it for good treasures. It seems that this should be the reward for the 2nd trial. Chu-Mu thought to himself. He let out a long breath and the nervousness in his heart disappeared. The degree of preciousness of the Great Spirit Soul Pill should be above the heavenly Desolate Body Refining Liquid. After putting away the Great Soul Pill and storing the black jade bottle into his interspatial ring, Chu-Mu took out the 3rd ball of light. Crushing the ball of light, the information flowed into his mind again. At the same time, a round object appeared in Chu-Mu's palm. It was khaki in color with specks of gold. There were many patterns on it that crisscrossed, forming a seemingly messy pattern. It was a compass. At the edge of the compass there were 10 holes, each with a grain of sand. Chu-Mu recognized it at a glance. It was the sand of time. Low-grade sand of time. There were actually 10 grains of low-grade sand of time on this compass. Chu-Mu had personally experienced the benefits of the sand of time. When he saw it, his eyes immediately widened. 10 grains of low-grade sand of time could last him 10 months. 10 months of time was equivalent to 20 months, which was double the amount of time. Immediately, Chu-Mu calmed down a little and digested the information in his mind. Time compass. This was the name of this khaki compass. The 10 grains of sand on it were indeed low-grade sand of time. Each grain of low-grade sand of time could allow a primary realm swordsman to obtain double the time. It lasted for 1 month, which was equivalent to 2 months. However, the effects of the sand of time couldn't be stacked. Only after using 1 grain could the next one be used. The time compass had the ability to stack the effects of the sand of time. When 10 grains of low-grade sand of time were placed in the time compass and activated, a primary realm swordsman would obtain 10 times the time. However, it would only last for 1 month. Chu-Mu immediately understood. Activating the time compass would create a special time domain that would allow one to obtain 10 times the time. In other words, 1 month inside would be equivalent to 11 months in the outside world. The time compass was indeed a precious treasure. If one had enough sand of time, the effects would be unimaginable. These 10 grains of sand of time came with the time compass. After using them, there would be no more. One would have to search for more. As of now, the time compass was a one-time use item. However, it was still a precious treasure among precious treasures. After Chu-Mu observed it, he put it away. Taking a deep breath, Chu-Mu calmed his excited mind. He then took out the 4th ball of light. The first 3 balls were better than the last. Chu-Mu was looking forward to the 4th one. After crushing the ball of light, information still flowed into Chu-Mu's mind, allowing him to know. After the ball of light was shattered, there was a silver box. This box wasn't made of gold, wood, or jade. Chu-Mu didn't know what it was made of. When he held it in his hand, he felt a little cold. The box wasn't big. After opening it, there was a longan-sized silver pill inside. The silver color was very pure. It didn't contain any impurities and didn't emit any smell. It was a perfect grade pill. The Great Soul pill was the same. Both of them had reached the perfect grade. Heavenly Soul Spirit Fusion Pill. This name was even more imposing than the Great Soul pill. It was the name of this silver pill. The information in his mind told Chu-Mu the effect of this Heavenly Soul Fusing pill. Chu-Mu's eyes widened. His breathing became rapid. Because of his excitement, his cheeks flushed red. With his temperament, most things wouldn't be able to make him feel excited, let alone lose his composure like now. However, this Heavenly Soul Fusing pill was too unbelievable. The Heavenly Soul Fusing pill only had one effect. After consuming it, it could transform one's spiritual will into spiritual willpower. Thinking about the implications, wouldn't he be excited? Origin Realm Swordsmen had spiritual will. After breaking through to the God-condensing realm, their spiritual will would transform into spiritual willpower. This was the norm. The only effect of the Heavenly Soul Fusing pill was to transform one's spiritual will into spiritual willpower. There was no need for a breakthrough in cultivation. To put it simply, Chu-Mu didn't need to make a breakthrough in cultivation. He could just use the Heavenly Soul Fusing pill to transform his powerful spiritual will into spiritual willpower. Thinking about it, with Chu-Mu's strength, if he could transform all of his spiritual will into spiritual willpower, what would happen to his strength? The power of divine sense was 1 level stronger than spiritual will. Taking a few deep breaths, Chu-Mu tried to calm himself down. His hands were trembling a little because he couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart. Chu-Mu couldn't imagine what it meant. However, He knew that after consuming the heavenly soul-fusing pill and transforming one's spiritual will into spiritual willpower, it would be a qualitative leap. Letting out another breath, Chu-Mu finally calmed down. He closed the silver box and put it into his interspatial ring. He then took out the fifth ball of light. The reward for the fourth stage was already so amazing. What about the reward for the fifth stage? Without giving himself time to think, he crushed the ball of light. The information flowed into his mind again. Token. This was a token. On one side there were words, and on the other side there was a carving of a palace. Chu-Mu didn't recognize the words, nor could he see them. However, this didn't stop him from recognizing them. This was because the information in his mind allowed him to know the name of the token. Divine Wilderness Secret Order. This Divine Wilderness Secret Order could not increase one's cultivation or strength. It only had one use, and that was to enter the Divine Wilderness mystic realm again. Although there was only one chance, if he grasped it well, he could obtain even more benefits. Although it wasn't like the previous stages, the Divine Wilderness Secret Order could allow Chu-Mu to enter the Divine Wilderness mystic realm again after leaving it. Chu-Mu could wait until he became stronger before entering the Divine Wilderness mystic realm again. This was an opportunity that no one else had. There were definitely more treasures in the Divine Wilderness mystic realm. Playing with the Divine Wilderness Secret Order, Chu-Mu began to think in his excitement. Those 30 inner palace disciples should have entered the trial altar as well. If they also entered the trial altar, would their rewards be the same as mine? Soon after, Chu-Mu laughed, silently thinking that his idea was a bit unreliable. Among the 30 inner palace disciples, the strongest was Ho Qingming, ranked first. However, according to the trial's rules, Ho Qingming might not be able to pass the fifth stage like him. He might not even be able to pass the fourth stage. However, this was just a guess. He didn't know Ho Qingming's true strength. Keeping the Divine Wilderness Secret Order, Chu-Mu continued to move forward, heading higher up the mountain. Big brother, what was your reward for passing the 3 stages? The Seventh Sword Tower's third brother asked. The others also looked at Ho Qingming curiously. The reward for the first stage is the Heavenly Desolate Body Refinement Liquid. The reward for the second stage is the Great Soul Elixir. The reward for the third stage is the Time Compass. Ho Qingming didn't hide anything and said frankly, the reward for the first stage is the same as mine. The reward for the first and second stages is the same. What is the Time Compass? Ho Qingming explained the Time Compass, which caused everyone to exclaim. This time, only Big Brother passed the third stage. The others would at most pass the second stage. The Time Compass is unique. Lin Yi smiled. The others agreed. Ho Qingming also thought so. As for Chu-Mu, they had accidentally forgotten about him. He was only in the Origin Realm. So what if he got first place in the Outer Palace tournament? He was just an ant. Chapter 846. With such a bountiful harvest, Chu-Mu's heart was abnormally full. His footsteps were faster and lighter than before as he climbed higher up the mountain. However, at 5,000 meters, he did not find any altar. As he continued to climb, at 6,000 meters, he still did not find any altar. Along the way, he found quite a number of elixirs. They were very old, thousands of years old, even tens of thousands of years old. They were all picked by Chu-Mu for safekeeping. This mountain seemed to have no end. No matter how high he climbed, he was always enveloped in a layer of yellowish-brown clouds that became thicker and thicker. Other than Chu-Mu, Ho Qingming and company were also constantly climbing. They did not realize that as they ascended, they were gradually getting closer. Because the clouds were too thick, Chu-Mu did not calculate how high he had ascended. He just kept walking and walking. If he found any treasures, he would immediately take them. If he encountered any desolate beasts, he would immediately attack and kill them with all his might. Unknowingly, his eyes suddenly lit up. The clouds dispersed, revealing a vast expanse. After taking a few more steps forward, he touched an invisible wall that blocked Chu Mu. Chu Mu reached out his hand and touched it. After careful observation, he realized that there was something like a seal in front of him that blocked him. What is this? Is there no path? Not far away, a voice sounded. It was Ho Qingming and the other inner palace disciples. They were not far away, and when they saw Chu Mu, they were immediately surprised. Originally, they thought that a mere outer palace disciple moving alone in the divine desolate mystic realm would definitely die if he encountered a powerful desolate beast. They never imagined that they would meet Chu Mu here. This guy's luck is too good. They did not believe that Chu Mu had such great strength to be able to kill powerful desolate beasts all the way here. One had to know that although the desolate beasts they encountered along the way were easily killed, many of them were powerful desolate beasts that could instantly kill a divine condensation realm swordsman. Chu Mu glanced at them. There were about 16 of them. That was to say, the other 14 people were either dead or had been sent out of the divine desolate mystic realm after failing the trial altar. Luo Dahai was not among them. It seemed like he was one of the people who had been teleported out. Unfortunately, he probably did not gain much. The others had no relationship with Chu Mu. Chu Mu ignored them and turned around to study the seal in front of him. This was a high-tier seal. If not for the fact that Zhang Xian had bumped into it, he would not have noticed it at all. It was fortunate that the seal did not actively attack him, or else he might have been killed or severely injured by that strike. Since it was a seal, it would be easy to handle. Chu Mu's attainments in sealing had reached the level of a martial grandmaster. The others also recognized that this was a seal. One of them had dabbled in seals and planned to study it. But when he saw Chu Mu pretending to study it, he sneered disdainfully. After an unknown amount of time, Chu Mu was still researching, but the others had already lost their patience. They didn't understand at all. Even the inner court disciple who had dabbled in seals had to give up. The difference in their attainments was too great. Let's attack together and break the seal, one of them suggested. That's right. There must be a great treasure inside. The suggestion of using force to break the seal was immediately approved. Chu Mu, who was studying the seal, also heard it. He gave up on retreating for the time being, leaving it to the others. I'll try first, Ewing said, directly pulling out his sword. In an instant, a tyrannical sword attack burst out, causing Chu Mu's eyelids to twitch. Sword skill. What Ewing used was a sword skill, a true sword skill. In other words, Yu Ying's attainments in controlling power had reached the level of one with the sword. There was a sharp screech as Yu Ying's sword light condensed into the shape of an eagle. Its claws were sharp, and it pounced forward, slashing at the seal and tearing at it with its sharp claws. However, the seal did not budge at all, while Yu Ying's sword light dissipated instantly, turning into sword light. If such a sword attack hit him, he would definitely be reduced to ashes. However, the seal did not budge at all. It was enough to show how powerful this seal was. After some research, although Chu Mu still could not break the seal, he already knew that this seal was very powerful. It was extremely difficult to break it, and it was close to impossible. Of course, if he had enough time, he might be able to break it. Let's attack the same point of the seal together, one of them suggested. All right. Then let's attack. All of them agreed. They knew Yu Ying's strength, and they also knew the power of that sword attack. They also saw the result. The 16 inner court disciples were about to attack together. Chu Mu immediately widened his eyes. Each of their auras rose and condensed. Just the aura alone was enough to suffocate Chu Mu. Then, sword light flashed, and the eagle soared into the sky again. There were also others like the setting of a waning moon, the sun in the sky, and the passing of a hurricane. It seemed to be no different from the sword skills in the ancient sword continent, but the power was thousands of times more powerful. The control of the power in the realm of one with the sword allowed the power of a casual sword attack to exceed the limit of the warrior realm. Sword skills were the perfect combination of sword will, sword origin ultimacy, and other powers. They could be released in a special way to form a more effective attack. The difference between the sword skills in the realm of one with the sword and those in the ancient sword continent was like the difference between charcoal and diamond. Each of the 16 swordsmen had reached the realm of one with the sword in terms of power control, which surprised Chu Mu again. Could it be that the top 30 inner court disciples have all reached the realm of one with the sword? Chu Mu could not help but think of Huolingguang. It was said that he was in the top 30. Then, could his power control have also reached the realm of one with the sword? Among the 16 people, Chu Mu focused on Ho Qingming because he was the most powerful one. Ho Qingming's sword skills were not as powerful as the others, but Chu Mu could see that their power was more condensed. The realm of one with the sword also varied. The power of the sword skills also varied. It all depended on the individual's comprehension and talent. Obviously, Ho Qingming was the most powerful one among them. A cyan sword light pierced through the void. It had the power to pierce through the heavens. Just by watching from the side, Chu Mu felt his heart skip a beat. It was as if his mind had been pierced. 16 people, 16 swords, and 16 sword skills all struck the same spot on the seal. In an instant, ripples spread out from the seal, and the sword skills all dissipated, turning into countless sword lights, like a swarm of fireflies in the dark night, circling and dancing in the air. After 3 breaths, the ripples on the seal disappeared. The seal was safe and sound. It was not damaged at all. Not believing it, the 16 inner court disciples attacked again. This time, the sword skills were even more powerful. The ripples spread out and after 4 breaths, they disappeared. After 3 consecutive attempts, the 16 inner court disciples could not help but give up. The seal was too powerful. They could not shake it at all. Even if they used all their strength to attack the same spot, they could not do anything. Seeing them give up, Chu Mu went forward again to study the seal. "You're just pretending." Among the inner court disciples, Wang Zhonghai, who was involved in the seal, curled his lips and said disdainfully. His voice was neither loud nor soft. Chu Mu also heard it. He just glanced at Wang Zhonghai and ignored him. Others were talking about others. He did his own thing. "Let's think of other ways to break it," Ho Qingming said. Everyone began to think hard. Chu Mu continued to study. Time passed slowly. Everyone was not sure how long they had been in the divine barren mysterious realm. But based on their senses, it should be less than 20 days. There was still some time. Chu Mu was completely immersed in studying the seal in front of him. Bit by bit, he was able to get a glimpse of it. The more he researched, the more Chu Mu understood the power and profoundness of this seal. At the same time, it allowed him to fuse together the memories of the seal he inherited and use them for himself. His attainment in the path of seals began to clearly increase. "Forget it. Since we can't break it, I will go to other places to take a look." Finally, one of the 16 could not help but say, "I will go with you. I don't want to stay here any longer. It is a waste of time. Why don't we go to other places to take a look? Maybe we will find something else. There is only one chance to enter the divine barren mysterious realm. If we miss it, there will be no more. Time is precious. We cannot waste it here." Not long after, 6 people split into 2 groups and left the place, heading in different directions. As for the remaining 10, they continued to study the seal. After a while, 2 of them turned and left. Gradually, there were only 4 people from the 7-sword tower left. The other one had failed in the trial altar and was sent out. "Big brother. Let's wait and see," Ho Qingming said. He was sure that there would be a great harvest after breaking the seal. Chu Mu also knew that everyone had left. However, he was immersed in studying the seal and did not care. The seal was a Tao of its own. It was broad and profound. Under Chu Mu's study, he felt as if he had entered an ocean of seals and was wandering in it. This kind of seal was a compound seal. It was a compound seal of various systems. Mixed together in a mysterious way, it would greatly improve Chu Mu's attainment in the various systems of the Tao of Seals. Unknowingly, Chu Mu's attainment in the various systems of the Tao of Seals had reached the Great Grandmaster level. He was an all-round Great Grandmaster. Upon reaching this level, Zhang Xian was able to gain a deeper understanding of the profundity of the seal. Chu Mu began to attempt to break the seal. While breaking the seal, he would compare and verify little by little, increasing his attainments in seals. What is he doing? Is he trying to break the seal? Ho Qingming and the others were shocked when they saw Chu Mu's actions. They immediately shook their heads. It was impossible. As time passed, the seal in front of them suddenly rippled. It was like the surface of a lake that was blown by a strong wind. Then it disappeared. After the seal disappeared, a huge and majestic palace appeared before everyone's eyes. Before they could even react, they felt the palace in front of them fading and blurring before it finally disappeared. Chapter 847. The figure broke through the sky and flew past like a bird. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. The muscles in his body vibrated at a high frequency, and the rebound force stacked on top of each other, creating a powerful driving force that further increased his speed. After flying for 3 breaths of time, there was a sharp explosion in the void, stirring up the clouds and shattering the air. This was Chu Mu. At the same time, in other parts of the small world, there were figures that broke through the void and flew towards the desolate God Mountain. These people were the disciples of the desolate Heaven-Earth Palace that were sent out of the divine desolate secret realm. After Chu Mu broke the seal of the Nameless Mountain in the divine desolate secret realm, he saw a huge and magnificent palace with Ho Qingming and the others. Before they could move, the palace became blurry. It turned out that the time was up and they were sent out by the power of the divine desolate secret realm. With the seal broken and the palace in front of them, they were sent out of the divine desolate secret realm because the time was up. Ho Qingming and the others were conflicted. Why didn't the time be longer? Although Chu Mu was also conflicted, he still had the divine desolate secret order and could enter the divine desolate secret realm once more, so he calmed down. After being sent out of the divine desolate secret realm, they would not appear at the place where they entered the divine desolate secret realm. Instead, they would randomly appear in the outside world. If they were unlucky, they might directly enter a dangerous place. Chu Mu's luck was not very good, but it was not bad either. He could not wait to return to the desolate Heaven-Earth Palace as soon as possible and immediately cultivate desolate heaven body refining liquid, time compass, heavenly soul spirit fusion pill. These 3 treasures could allow Chu Mu's strength to make a qualitative leap in a short period of time. His heart was burning like a flame. He was excited and could not suppress it. He did not want to suppress it. His blood seemed to be boiling and energy surged throughout his body like a tide. His speed seemed to have increased again. 2 hours later, Chu Mu landed at the foot of the desolate God Mountain. Flying was not allowed on the desolate God Mountain. Even without flying, Chu Mu's speed was not slow. With a leap, he flew up the mountain. Soon, he arrived at the outer palace, which was 3,000 meters away. He did not return to his room. Instead, he quickly went to the secret room for closed-door cultivation. Along the way, Chu Mu had already made up his mind. The heavenly wasteland body refining fluid, the time compass, and the heavenly soul fusion pill. He planned to take the heavenly soul fusion pill first and convert all his spiritual force into spiritual force. Compared to mastering the 3rd level of the heavenly wasteland sword body, where all of his mental strength had been converted into divine thoughts, the improvement in his strength would be greater. Furthermore, the improvement in all aspects would also be more obvious. In the future, when he wanted to refine various kinds of profound meanings, his speed and efficiency would also be higher. After spending some outer palace contribution points, Chu Mu opened a secluded secret room. After closing the door, Chu Mu sat down cross-legged and began to adjust his breathing. When he obtained the heavenly soul fusion pill, the information that was transmitted to his mind also stated that the process of transforming one's mental strength into spiritual force after consuming the heavenly soul fusion pill was not pleasant. If he could not bear it, all of his previous efforts would be wasted, and it would also cause his soul to be injured. Chu Mu made every preparation and regulated his breath so that his essence, energy, and spirit were all at their peak. In this way, he could better deal with the pain of transforming his mental strength into spiritual force. Let's begin. After muttering to himself, Chu Mu took out a silver box and opened it. The silver elixir pill appeared in front of his eyes. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. His breath was long and his heart was completely calm. There was not the slightest ripple. He threw the heavenly soul fusion pill into his mouth and swallowed it. When it entered his stomach, it immediately turned into a tyrannical medicinal power that rushed up like a torrent. In an instant, it rushed into his spiritual world like a storm. Under the attack of the silver storm, it directly wrapped up the 6 mind stars and the other mental strength. Chu Mu felt that there was an earth-shaking change inside his spiritual world. His soul was also trembling. The silver storm became more and more intense. Under the attack of the storm, the 6 mind stars constantly flickered and tottered as if they were about to disintegrate and collapse. The terrible pressure acted on Chu Mu's soul. It was as if there was an additional mountain pressing down on it. It was so heavy that his thoughts were almost frozen. This feeling seemed to be very painful, but it was not painful at all. It was very strange and very uncomfortable. As time passed, it became more and more obvious and intense. The burden on his soul became greater and greater. No wonder it was said that if he could not bear it, his soul would be injured. Chu Mu's will was very tenacious. Although the discomfort continued to intensify, he still resisted it and observed the changes in his spiritual world. The silver storm was shrinking and becoming denser. The power inside was also becoming more powerful. Under the attack of the silver storm, the 6 mind stars were damaged one by one. They turned back into pure mental strength and merged with the other mental strength like a lake. This lake continued to rotate with the onslaught of the silver storm. Slowly, it turned into a whirlpool and gradually merged with the silver storm. During the process of merging, the pressure on Chu Mu also increased. Now, the pressure had reached a certain level. An ordinary ultimate astral realm swordsman would not be able to bear it, but Chu Mu was able to. All of his mental strength finally merged with the power of the silver storm. They were indistinguishable from each other. In the spiritual world, a huge silver whirlpool was formed. The bottom of the whirlpool continued to extend and converge into a single point. It gradually became brighter and brighter. The pressure on his soul also continued to increase. Chu Mu's face was a bit distorted. The veins on his forehead bulged out one by one. The veins on his neck also bulged out. They looked like snakes coiling around his neck. It was a terrifying sight. His thoughts almost stopped. A stiff feeling made Chu Mu extremely uncomfortable. The pressure on his soul was almost causing it to collapse. There was only one voice in Chu Mu's heart. Hang in there, hang in there, hang in there. You must hang in there. You must hang in there. You must hang in there. His tenacious will and strong belief completely exploded. The power of the soul-fusing pill, which had merged with all of his mental strength, gradually condensed into a silver ball. It was almost solid. The pressure had reached its limit. Chu Mu only felt that his consciousness was about to sink. Darkness filled his eyes and his mind was about to sink into a dark abyss. Wake up! With a roar in his heart, Chu Mu's body shook. His sinking consciousness suddenly became much clearer. In the spiritual world, the spinning silver spherical solid was about the size of a ping-pong ball. Its entire body was pure silver without any impurities. It looked like it had a metallic texture. It was still not enough. It seemed that the last step was needed to complete the transformation. A kind of enlightenment arose. Suddenly, the silver spherical solid stopped spinning and vibrated at a high frequency. It was as if something inside was about to break out. A loud roar swept across the spiritual world, shaking it in all directions. The rumbling sound covered everything. Then, the silver spherical body exploded. The silver power was like a storm that raged between heaven and earth. It was like a tsunami, like a flash flood, as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Everything was destroyed. Chumu's consciousness saw this scene. Before he could fight back, he fell into the darkness and fainted. Fainting at this time would not affect the result because the transformation of the spiritual will was completed. Chumu's spiritual world was filled with the power of spiritual will. The power of spiritual will that had just erupted turned into a monstrous wave and rushed in all directions. Chumu's consciousness sank and fell into a coma. Otherwise, he would have seen a miraculous scene. He saw that his spiritual world was undergoing a huge change. It was not an exaggeration to say that the world was undergoing a drastic change. Under the impact of this tyrannical wave of spiritual will, the embryonic form of the sword soul was on the verge of collapse. The sword will in it also seemed to be crushed and defeated. All the power of profound meanings was also on the verge of shattering under the impact of the tyrannical spiritual will. The pressure on the soul disappeared. The potential of the soul under the suppression counterattacked and burst out in an instant. An invisible force penetrated into the spiritual world in an instant. It ignored the tyrannical spiritual will torrent and directly passed through all the profound meanings that were on the verge of collapse. Finally, it poured into the embryonic form of the sword soul. All the profound meanings, the embryonic form of the sword soul, and the sword will seemed to have received a strong support. Under the impact of the tyrannical spiritual will torrent, they gradually calmed down and became more aggressive. The tyrannical spiritual will torrent attacked wave after wave, passing through the embryonic form of the sword soul, the sword will, and other profound meanings. Then, it hit the edge of the spiritual world, hitting the barrier of the spiritual world. The entire spiritual world was also shaken. Cracks appeared on the barrier, as if an eggshell was about to be broken. The barrier of the spiritual world instinctively resisted, and the war started. Another flow of tyrannical soul potential burst out, cutting into the battlefield silently. After passing through the embryonic form of the sword soul, the sword will, and other profound meanings, it hit the barrier of the spiritual world. The barrier of the spiritual world, which was on the verge of breaking, received a strong support. The cracks no longer expanded, but quickly shrank and restored to its original state. At the same time, the tyrannical spiritual will torrent unceasingly attacked, as if it was endless. Wave after wave, the barrier of the spiritual world was expanded little by little, as if it was elastic. All of this happened while Chumu was unconscious. Chumu didn't know anything. If he could have watched it while he was awake, perhaps he could have gained something. Being unconscious, Chumu couldn't do anything. All the changes could only be carried out naturally. No one knew that in this short time, Chumu's spiritual world had undergone earth-shaking changes. It could be said that he had been reborn. From now on, his sharpness was sharper, and his potential was deeper. His innate talent was more intimidating, and his achievements in the future would be greater. Gradually, the torrent of spiritual will didn't have enough power. It slowly calmed down, and the changes in the spiritual world also calmed down. Chapter 848. The Inner Palace disciples that entered the divine desolate mystic realm all returned to the heaven wasteland earth palace. Those that did not obtain the rewards of the trial altar were very depressed. The many desolate stones and elixirs were not enough to satisfy them. Especially when they found out about the rewards of the trial altar, they were extremely vexed. As for those that obtained the rewards, when they returned, they immediately began to cultivate to increase their strength. The heaven wasteland earth palace did not stipulate that the rewards of the divine desolate mystic realm had to be handed over. It was all up to the individual to decide. It was up to the individual to hand it over or not. In a secluded chamber in the outer palace, the light was very bright. The chamber was not very large, and it was as bright as day. Chu-mu, who was in a coma, closed his eyes. He felt his consciousness fall into an endless darkness. He chose a direction and continued to move forward. He didn't know how much time had passed. It felt like an instant, but also like tens of thousands of years. Finally, a dot of light appeared in front of him, giving Chu-mu the motivation to move forward. He flew over and plunged into the light. He slowly woke up and opened his closed eyes. 2 rays of silver light shot out, leaving 2 straight traces in the air. The originally bright secret room suddenly became several times brighter, becoming dazzling. The silver light converged and the light in the chamber returned to normal. Chu-mu's aura seemed to have completely disappeared. He was clearly sitting there, but it was as if he did not exist. Chu-mu closed his eyes again. His fully awakened consciousness was immersed in the spiritual world. In an instant, Chu-mu was shocked. "This is my spiritual world." His tone was filled with disbelief. The huge spiritual world seemed to stretch as far as the eye could see. The sword soul embryonic form in the center and the profound power around it had been extended by a lot. 10 times. Compared to the previous spiritual world, it was 10 times bigger. Chu-mu expected that after consuming the heavenly soul spirit fusion pill, his spiritual consciousness would transform into divine sense. His spiritual world should have expanded a little, but he did not expect it to expand by so much. 10 times. This meant potential. The size of a swordsman's spiritual world represented the amount of spiritual force he could possess when he reached the limit of that realm. When one reached the limit of a certain realm, one's spiritual consciousness or spiritual force would definitely fill the entire spiritual world. After being shocked by this enormous mental world, the moment he calmed down, Chu-mu began to inspect his evolved divine remembrance. The light silver divine remembrance had a pure color without any impurities, indicating that its purity was very high. It was no wonder that Chu-mu had tempered his mental intent to the limit after transforming it into his divine remembrance. As soon as Chu-mu's consciousness came into contact with the power of divine sense, he immediately felt its vastness, tenacity, strength, and power. It was 10 times more powerful than spiritual sense. How terrifying! However, in terms of quantity, the power of his spiritual sense was greatly reduced. It was only 1/10 of his original spiritual sense. Then, Chu-mu's consciousness felt a sense of deficit. His spiritual sense had just transformed into divine sense, and its quantity was greatly reduced. It was in urgent need of replenishment. Thinking that he still had 4 spirit congealing pills, the role of this spirit congealing pill was to assist in the transformation of spiritual sense into divine sense, and it could also be used to replenish divine sense. Continue to check other things. When Chu-mu's consciousness came into contact with the Sword Soul prototype, he was stunned. Was this still the Sword Soul prototype? No, this was no longer the Sword Soul prototype, but the Sword Soul, the real Sword Soul. Chu-mu could feel that the stability of the Sword Soul was far from what the Sword Soul prototype could compare with. Then, he discovered a change that shocked him even more. 9th transformation. Because he was too shocked, he exclaimed aloud. Sword intent reached the early stage of the 9th transformation. Unbelievable, Chu-mu suspected that he was hallucinating. Didn't his sword intent reach the limit of the 8th transformation, which was the limit of the soul? At that time, although he felt a little regretful that it was only the limit of the 8th transformation and not the 9th transformation, the limit of the 8th transformation was still a level that others could only dream of. It was very powerful. After confirming a few more times, no, it was really the 9th transformation, the early stage of the 9th transformation. The early stage of the ninth transformation sword intent was sharper and more powerful than the eighth transformation sword intent. It was deeply hidden in the sword's soul. Once released, it would be earth-shattering. Suddenly, the shocked Chu Mu thought of something and his consciousness quickly drifted to the profound meaning of metal. Ninth transformation. The profound meaning of metal had also reached the ninth transformation level, the same as the sword intent, the early stage of the ninth transformation. The early stage of the ninth transformation sword intent, the early stage of the ninth transformation gold profound meaning. The tyrannical feeling penetrated the entire spiritual world. Chu Mu also had a feeling that the early stage of the ninth transformation was not the limit of his soul. He tried to calm himself down. Could it be that the heavenly soul-fusing pill transformed my spiritual sense into divine sense and also developed my soul's potential? In other words, my soul had not reached the limit before, and there was still a portion of power that had not been developed, resulting in my sword intent and profound being only refined to the limit of the eighth transformation. Chu Mu's guess was consistent with the truth. It was indeed because his soul's potential had been fully developed after his spiritual sense transformed into divine sense. The strength of his soul had greatly increased, increasing the limits of his sword intent and profound. With the impact of the divine sense storm, the instant refinement had caused his sword intent and profound to break through the limit of the eighth transformation, advancing to the early stage of the ninth transformation. Subsequently, Chu Mu also discovered that the other profound meanings had also been refined. The profound of water had directly reached the early stage of the sixth transformation, the profound of air had reached the early stage of the third transformation, and the other profound meanings had all reached the early stage of the fifth transformation. Improvement, an all-round improvement, a huge leap in improvement. In an instant, who knew how much time Chu Mu had saved? The sword intent and the profound of metal had both reached the early stage of the ninth transformation and had not yet reached the current limit. In other words, Chu Mu could also refine the other profound meanings to the ninth transformation level. Exhaling a long breath, Chu Mu's heart was turbulent like a river overturning the sea. He could not have expected that just taking a heavenly soul-fusing pill to transform his spiritual sense into divine sense would cause so many changes. It was earth-shaking and a complete rebirth. A strong feeling arose spontaneously. With his current strength, if he were to take the trial again, Chu Mu would definitely challenge the sixth stage. After a while, Chu Mu accepted the huge changes in his spiritual world. Then, he took out a spirit congealing pill and took it. The spirit congealing pill contained a powerful force that could be directly transformed into divine sense. With the consumption of the medicinal power of this spirit congealing pill, Chu Mu's divine sense was also gradually increasing. After the spiritual sense transformed into divine sense, the absorption effect of the medicinal pill also increased several times. It didn't take long for Chu Mu to completely absorb the medicinal effect of this spirit congealing pill. The power of divine sense had obviously improved a little, but it was still not enough. He directly took out the remaining 3 spirit congealing pills and swallowed them together and absorbed them again. When the medicinal effect of the 3 spirit congealing pills was completely consumed and absorbed, Chu Mu's divine sense was much stronger. However, he still didn't feel full because his own potential was too profound, far better than other swordsmen. It will take almost 5 more spirit congealing pills for my divine sense to recover to the original amount of spiritual sense and reach the current limit, Chu Mu secretly said. Now he was in the primary realm according to the division of cultivation, but in fact, the symbol of the divine condensation realm was more important than the power of divine sense. Therefore, Chu Mu could barely be regarded as a divine condensation realm swordsman. All in all, his situation was very special. In terms of the level of divine sense, Chu Mu was currently equivalent to a beginner divine condensation realm swordsman. However, once the power of divine sense was replenished to saturation, not only was it obviously superior to the general beginner divine condensation realm swordsman in terms of quality, but it was also far superior in terms of quantity, at least 10 times the gap. Spirit congealing pill, Chu Mu secretly said. It was estimated that it was not so easy to obtain this spirit congealing pill. There was no such pill in the outer palace at all. At least it could only be obtained by entering the inner palace. However, to enter the inner palace, Chu Mu still needs to break through to the divine condensation realm to be considered a real divine condensation realm. Trying to mobilize the power of divine sense, there was a jerky feeling and it was not very smooth. After thinking about it carefully, Chu Mu understood that the power of divine sense was the symbol of a divine condensation realm swordsman. Often, the swordsman broke through the cultivation first, and then the spiritual sense transformed into the power of divine sense. It was a sequential process. Cultivation was like a foundation. Only when the foundation was strong enough could it withstand it. Chu Mu's foundation was very stable, but after all, it was still in the origin realm. It was equal to the spiritual sense, but not to the power of divine sense. It was like how one could easily pull 100 pounds of weight, but when the weight reached a few hundred pounds or 1,000 pounds, it would become very difficult and strenuous. All of a sudden, the great joy of transforming the spiritual sense into the power of divine sense weakened a lot. But no matter what, such a transformation was still very important. At least, the potential of his soul had been developed, and his strength had increased greatly. His sword will and profound had both broken through their original limit. In addition, he also felt that the speed of his thoughts had increased, as if the bandwidth had increased from 1 megabyte to 10 megabyte. Chu Mu also believed that his comprehension would have increased along with it. There was another point, although it had not been confirmed, but Chu Mu was already certain that the efficiency of refining profound would also increase. For sure, the power of divine sense was much stronger than the spiritual sense. Using the power of divine sense to assist in refining would definitely be much faster than using the spiritual sense. There were shortcomings, but there were more benefits. It went without saying. When he had completely calmed down, Chu Mu stood up, opened the door of the secret room, and walked out. After asking around, he found out that he had stayed in the secret room for almost half a month. In other words, it took about 10 days for his spiritual sense to completely transform into the power of divine sense. A normal swordsman would not be able to withstand that kind of pressure, but Chu Mu had endured it and gained a lot. Chapter 849. Birds fly in the sky, fish swim in the sea. Chu Mu had a clearer understanding of the power of divine thought. Closing his eyes, even if he did not release the power of divine thought, he could clearly perceive everything within a few hundred meters around him. Even the dust particles floating in the air could be seen clearly. In the past, Chu Mu could only achieve this effect by releasing his mind power. Although Chu Mu could not control his mind power at will, the improvement of his perception was very obvious. The improvement of his 6 senses was also obvious. The space was so clear that all the power fluctuations were hidden in it and Chu Mu could clearly sense them. It seemed that as long as he wanted, he could easily perceive and comprehend other powers and promote them to ultimacy. However, he already had enough ultimacies, so there was no need to pursue them. A considerable amount of time had passed since the Outer Palace 100-year competition. The limelight had passed, and all sorts of discussions had died down. Therefore, even if Chu Mu appeared in front of everyone, it wouldn't cause much of a commotion. Chu Mu practiced his swordsmanship in the Outer Palace martial arts practice field. The speed of his sword was very slow, as if he was practicing Tai Chi. His eyes were closed as he carefully felt and captured the mystery of each stroke. His mental remembrance had transformed into mental remembrance, and his soul's potential had been further developed. This caused Chu Mu's comprehension to clearly increase, his thinking speed to become faster, and his perception to become stronger. With all these factors combined, Chu Mu was able to better and faster comprehend things. His sword principal territory had already reached the early stage of level 9. He believed that with the improvement of his divine thought, it would be much faster to reach level 10. He was still practicing the Sky Desolation swordsmanship. The Sky Desolation swordsmanship was very mysterious. Even though Chu Mu had merged the first, middle, and last 33 strokes of the Sky Desolation swordsmanship into one stroke, he had not completely comprehended the Sky Desolation swordsmanship. Slowing down the speed of his sword, each strike felt as if it weighed millions of pounds, yet it also felt as light as a feather. The extreme contradiction made the surrounding outer palace disciples feel very uncomfortable. Their expressions changed drastically, and they clutched their chests as if they were about to vomit blood. Chu Mu was completely unaware that he had entered a very special state. His swordsmanship attainments were improving bit by bit. The air around Zhang Xian was stirred up by the dancing sword, forming a visible airflow. Strands of airflow circled around him, as though a storm was forming. Unknowingly, Chu Mu's figure had already been enveloped by countless air currents, as if he had turned into a cocoon. A moment later, a sword broke out of the cocoon and stood proudly. There seemed to be an endless amount of smoke on his body, dissipating along with the dissipating airflow. The wind was light and the clouds were calm. Chu Mu pulled out a sword flower, which was as clear as a real flower, vivid and lifelike. Sheathing the sword back into its sheath, Chu Mu strode away. His swordsmanship domain had reached the middle of the 9th level. In addition to the improvement of his swordsmanship domain, Chu Mu had another enlightenment, as long as he completely comprehended the Heavenly Wasteland sword technique, which was to fuse the 99 forms of the Heavenly Wasteland sword technique into one sword, and to fuse the initial deep level and extreme level into one. He would be able to reach the next level of power control, one with the sword. One with the sword would be able to comprehend a true sword technique, and when it was displayed, its power would be terrifying. Under normal circumstances, one with the sword was often one of the symbols of the sword of Gojosian level. Most of the divine condensation realm swordsmen were stuck at the extreme level and were unable to break through. After returning to his room, Chu Mu did not immediately start cultivating, but instead made a new cultivation plan for himself. The Heavenly Wasteland body refining fluid was obviously helpful for the cultivation of the first 3 levels of the Heavenly Wasteland sword body. The next step should be to cultivate the 3rd level of the Heavenly Wasteland sword body. However, because his sword will and gold profound had both reached the early 9th revolution and were not the true limit, Chu Mu had to study the 9th hand seal of the 9 revolution heaven shocking print technique. After thinking for a while, Chu Mu made a decision. He would use the Heavenly Wasteland body refining fluid to cultivate the 3rd level of the Heavenly Wasteland sword body while studying the 9th hand seal of the 9 revolution heaven shocking print technique. This was because the Heavenly Wasteland body refining fluid was used to soak in it. Chu Mu finished his preparations and once again went to the secret room for seclusion. Fortunately, he had won first place in the Outer Palace 100 Years tournament and had a large amount of Outer Palace contribution points as a reward that could not be used up in a short period of time. Entering the secret room for seclusion, he took out the large wooden bucket and the bottle filled with the Heavenly Wasteland body refining fluid. The bottle did not look big, only half the size of a palm, but there was a mystery inside, forming a space of its own. Opening the bottle stopper, he poured the Heavenly Wasteland body refining fluid into the wooden bucket. Suddenly, a stream of yellow liquid flew straight down into the wooden bucket. Soon, the wooden bucket was 80% full, but there was still some left in the bottle. Stuffing the bottle stopper and putting away the bottle, Chu Mu took off his clothes and jumped into the wooden bucket without splashing a single drop of water. Immediately, he felt a tingling sensation on his skin, as if he had been electrocuted. It was as if millions of ants were crawling on his skin, and it began to itch. Chu Mu didn't mind. To his strong willpower, this wasn't much. He began to cultivate the third level of the Heavenly Wasteland sword body, taking the initiative to absorb the energy of the Heavenly Wasteland body, refining fluid. Immediately, all the energy of the Heavenly Wasteland body, refining fluid poured into Chu Mu's body. The tingling and itching sensation instantly became 10 times stronger, and it continued to increase. He felt as if many small things had drilled into his body, swimming on the surface of his skin, and then constantly going deeper. The Heavenly Wasteland sword body, from the internal organs to the external skin, was all cultivated. There were no blind spots. The second level was to deepen and strengthen it, and the third level was the same. As the energy of the Heavenly Wasteland body, refining fluid, was continuously absorbed into his body, Chu Mu could feel his body becoming stronger and stronger. And the Heavenly Wasteland body, refining fluid in the wooden bucket, was also decreasing little by little. Although he could not control the power of his spiritual sense like he could control his spiritual sense, the power of his spiritual sense was still much stronger than his spiritual sense. This allowed Chu Mu to multitask even more clearly. When the cultivation of the third level of the Heavenly Wasteland sword body was on the right track, Chu Mu divided his attention to study the 9th hand seal of the 9 Revolution Heavenly Heart Shocking Seal. He had studied it before, and now he was studying it again. Coupled with the transformation of his spiritual sense and the increase of his comprehension, the speed of his research was even faster. As time passed, the Heavenly Wasteland body refining fluid that submerged Chu Mu's neck in the wooden bucket was consumed little by little, and gradually decreased. The research of the 9th hand seal of the 9 Revolution Heavenly Heart Shocking Seal also gradually made progress. The 9th hand seal was even more profound than the previous hand seals. Fortunately, Chu Mu's comprehension had clearly increased, and the research efficiency was higher. Multitasking effortlessly, Chu Mu could also clearly feel the increase in the strength of his body. It was an improvement in both the inside and outside, and was constantly becoming more powerful. Unknowingly, the outline of the muscles on Chu Mu's body became more and more obvious. Although they were not very large, but each piece looked so harmonious and full of beauty, as if they were carefully carved by a great master. Suddenly, Chu Mu's body trembled, and the muscles all over his body vibrated, causing the Heavenly Wasteland body refining fluid in the wooden bucket to produce circles of ripples that spread out. The third level of the Heavenly Wasteland sword body. The tyrannical power flowing in his body made Chu Mu want to punch out, but he knew that he could not do so now. Once he did, the wooden bucket would be broken. Time passed by. About a month later, the Heavenly Wasteland body refining fluid in the wooden bucket had been completely consumed. The 9th hand seal of the 9 Revolution Heavenly Heart Shocking Seal was also successfully studied. Without any posture, Chu Mu jumped out of the wooden bucket, waved his arms, and twisted his body. A tyrannical power flowed rapidly in his body, and instantly covered his entire body. Every piece of muscle was wriggling, and one could see that the muscles were filled with astonishing power. Once it exploded, it would be very shocking. He punched out silently, and even the shadow of the fist could not be seen. Following that, a sharp and ear-piercing sound rang out, as if it tore through the sky, and resounded throughout the entire seclusion room. Although Chu Mu focused on the sword, he had also practiced fist techniques before he started practicing the sword. That was the prerequisite for practicing the sword. Punches, kicks from slow to fast. Soon, a storm appeared in the seclusion room, and no one could distinguish between the punches and kicks. The strong wind from the punches and kicks were very terrifying, and ordinary Origin Realm swordsmen could not withstand it. The material of the seclusion room was special and very tough. No matter how the punches and kicks bombarded it, it was not damaged at all. However, there was a series of shocking rumbling sounds. After a full hour, the storm of human figures finally stopped. Exhaling, Chu Mu could clearly feel that every piece of muscle in his body was trembling, as if they were cheering and jumping for joy. Grabbing his sword, he instantly unsheathed it and swung it. The extreme mountain quake energy was activated, and it directly split the air. Both sides of the air were shattered, forming a vacuum. The Sky Desolation sword physique had broken through to the third level, and had become even more powerful. The frequency of the mountain quake energy had increased, and its power had increased. Next, I have to start refining the sword intent, and let it reach the limit first, Chu Mu thought to himself. Every day, the demonic crystals were consumed, and the storage was getting smaller and smaller. There was no other way, as there were too many profound meanings that needed to be refined. Taking out the bottle again, he poured the Sky Desolation body refinement liquid into the wooden bucket, filling it to 80%. Once again, he jumped into the wooden bucket, and only his head was exposed. Everything below his neck was immersed in the Sky Desolation body refinement liquid. Following that, Chu Mu took out the time compass. Activating the time compass, the power of the time compass immediately entered Chu Mu's body. The flow of time inside and outside was completely different, 10 times different. The third level of the Sky Desolation sword physique had already reached the early stage. If he continued to cultivate, it would slowly increase. Chu Mu began to use the ninth hand seal of the 9 Revolution Heavenly Shocking Seal, along with the mental cultivation method, to mobilize all the available power to refine the sword intent. Refining the early stage of the 9 Revolution sword intent was even more difficult. If it was still his mental will, who knew how long it would take to refine it? Fortunately, his mental will had transformed into the power of spirit, greatly increasing the efficiency. Under the power of the time compass, 1 month was equivalent to 11 months. Who knew how far he could refine the early stage of the 9 Revolution sword intent? Chapter 850. In the world of swordsmen, cultivation was a theme that would never go out of style. Cultivation was like sailing against the current. If you did not advance, you would fall behind. Once you slacked off, you would fall behind others and be surpassed. In the end, you would be annihilated. Every swordsman who truly wanted to go further on the path of swordsmanship would do their best to cultivate and develop their own potential. They would constantly strengthen themselves, cultivate themselves, train themselves, and combine their inner and outer bodies. Since the end of the Outer Palace's centennial competition, the powerful genius swordsmen had been cultivating all the time, using all kinds of feasible methods to increase their strength. One of the dangerous places in the small world was shrouded in endless darkness, forming a desolate area. This was one of the intermediate dangerous places, Dark Canyon. Dark Canyon was extremely dangerous. If you were not careful, you could die inside. Even the Inner Palace disciples could not escape. The Outer Palace disciples did not dare to enter at all. However, at this moment, a human figure rushed out from the darkness and soared into the sky. At an altitude of a few hundred meters, he unfolded his body and exploded with speed. Like a ghost, he flew in the direction of the desolate God Mountain. This person was Nan Wu. Chu Mu, this time I will defeat you, Nan Wu thought as he flew. He had stayed in the dark gorge for half a year. His ability to survive had completely surpassed the majority of divine condensation realm swordsmen. In that half a year, he had encountered many dangers that could have been fatal. However, he had managed to overcome them all with his own abilities. He had obtained many benefits, causing his strength to rise steadily, becoming more and more powerful. Nan Wu believed that he was stronger than Chu Mu now. He believed that he could defeat Chu Mu and become the #1 disciple of the Outer Palace. Nan Wu did not care about the title. The most important thing was to defeat Chu Mu and prove himself. Not long after Nan Wu returned to the Outer Palace of the Heaven Wasteland Earth Palace, he received challenges from others before he could challenge Chu Mu. Qi Shao, Ben Hu, Luo Qiushui, and the others. Their battles were public and most of the Outer Palace disciples saw it. First, it was Nan Wu versus Qi Shao. Qi Zhao's strength grew, but he was still defeated by Nan Wu's sword. Ben Hu was also defeated. Luo Qiushui was defeated by Nan Wu after a few more moves. Then, Qi Xiao, Ben Hu, and Luo Qiushui teamed up to fight Nan Wu. After a while, they were defeated by Nan Wu one by one. Powerful! How strange. Namo is really too strong. I'm afraid that even Chu Mu might not be his match. Nonsense. If Namo is getting stronger, how could Chu Mu stay where he is? It's hard to say. Namo's improvement is too great. We don't know about Chu Mu's improvement. Namo will definitely challenge Chu Mu. We'll know when the time comes. After consecutively defeating Qi Xiao, Ben Hu, and Luo Qiushui, these three increasingly powerful opponents, Nan Wu's aura was unparalleled as he directly challenged Chu Mu. However, the current Chu Mu was still in seclusion in the secret room. The power of the 10 low-grade sands of time within the time compass was finally exhausted. 1 month had passed in the outside world, but 11 months had passed in Chu Mu's time. During these 11 months, Chu Mu divided his attention into two. He cultivated the third level of the heavenly desolate sword body while mobilizing the power of his divine sense. He combined it with the 9th hand gesture and mental cultivation method of the 9 revolution heavenly heart-shocking seal to refine his sword intent. The efficiency of refining the power of divine sense was indeed many times greater than that of mental strength. In just 11 months, Chu Mu had refined his sword intent from the early stage of the 9th revolution to the late stage of the 9th revolution. However, he still hadn't reached the limit. It seemed that the limit of Chu Mu's soul should be the limit of the 9th revolution. Although it was a pity that he didn't reach the limit of the 9th revolution, if he had used his mental strength to refine his sword intent, he probably wouldn't have reached the middle stage of the 9th revolution. In other aspects, such as other ultimacies, Chu Mu made no progress because the power of the gloomy crystal was completely used to refine his sword intent. Sword intent late 9th revolution, metal profound early 9th revolution, water profound early 6th revolution, wood fire profound early 5th revolution, air profound early 3rd revolution. The heavenly desolate sword origin was still at the limit of the origin realm and had not changed at all. The heavenly desolate sword body had reached the middle stage of the 3rd level. The heavenly desolate body refining fluid had been used up. That bottle could be considered a treasure, so Yi Chen decided to keep it for now. Without the sands of time, the time compass was temporarily useless. If he wanted to continue to increase his strength, it would not be an easy matter. The time required would be even longer. Chu Mu put away the large wooden bucket and left the seclusion room. As soon as he returned to his room, he received a letter of challenge signed by Namo. Chu Mu had also heard about how Nan Wu had easily defeated Qi Xiao, Ben Hu, and Luo Qiushui after returning from his training. He couldn't help being surprised. He hadn't expected Nan Wu's strength to increase so much, far surpassing Qi Xiao, Luo Qiushui, and Ben Hu. But to challenge me? Chu Mu's face revealed a trace of a smile. During the centennial competition of the Outer Palace, he had not used his full strength at all. Now, he was many times stronger than before. It was unimaginable that Nan Wu had become even more powerful, as if he had obtained a fortuitous encounter. Chu Mu was confident that he could defeat him. It's not a bad idea to have some fun, Chu Mu said to himself and accepted Nan Wu's challenge. The battle was still under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Qi Xiao, Luo Qiushui, and the others who had been defeated by Nan Wu were all present. Because it was a battle between Chu Mu and Nan Wu, it had attracted most of the Outer Palace disciples. Except for those who had gone out to train, almost all of them were present. It was as if there was a sea of people surrounding them. After defeating you this time, I will go to the inner palace, Nan Wu said to Chu Mu in the sword battle arena. I'd like to fulfill your wish, but unfortunately, that would be disrespectful to you. You can only go to the inner palace with regret, Chu Mu said with a smile. After defeating Chu Mu, Nan Wu intended to break through to the divine condensation realm with the momentum of the number 1 disciple of the outer palace. Then, he would become an inner palace disciple and begin a new journey. However, Chu Mu said that if he fulfilled Nan Wu's wish, he would lose the battle and lose, but that would be disrespectful to Nan Wu. Both of them were full of confidence in themselves. Before the battle began, the confrontation of words had already made the blood of the spectators boil. With the sword in his hand, it became transparent in the blink of an eye. Nan Wu's figure also became transparent like the sword and disappeared like a ghost. He disappeared. Where did he go? Many outer palace disciples were shocked. In an instant, Nan Wu came behind Chu Mu and drew his sword. As soon as he drew his sword, he immediately launched a series of attacks. What he did not know was that all his movements were under Chu Mu's control. Chu Mu easily avoided Nan Wu's attack. Chu Mu's footsteps were neither fast nor slow, as if he was taking a leisurely stroll in the courtyard. The onlooking outer palace disciples were all dumbfounded. Is this a battle? It looked like a performance. Unable to defeat Chu Mu, Nan Wu's figure strangely appeared in front of Chu Mu. His eyes suddenly burst out a dark light, as if shooting out of the abyss, and shot into Chu Mu's eyes. His pupil technique had improved a lot after half a year's experience in the dark canyon. If it was in the outer palace competition, Chu Mu would definitely be affected and defeated. But now, the power of the pupil technique could not affect Chu Mu at all. As soon as it entered the spiritual world, it disappeared without a trace like a small stone falling into a lake. Nan Wu did not know that. He thought that his pupil technique could at least cause some trouble for Chu Mu. In an instant, he drew his sword and attacked 3 times in a row. It was the combination of the first 33 moves of the Heavenly Desolation Sword Art and the last 33 moves of the Heavenly Desolation Sword Art. The late-stage 7th Revolution Sword Essence and the late-stage 7th Revolution Profound Meaning were integrated into it. Each strike was more powerful than the previous one, which surprised everyone, including Qi Xiao and the others. It turned out that when Nan Wu defeated the 3 of them together, he had not unleashed his full strength. The late-stage 7th Revolution Sword Essence and the Profound Meaning also surprised Chu Mu. It seemed that Nan Wu did have a fortuitous encounter during this period, otherwise, he could not have improved so quickly. However, even if Nan Wu's Sword Essence and Profound Meaning were upgraded to the 8th Revolution, he was still no match for Chu Mu. Chu Mu waved his sword and didn't dodge at all, blocking Nan Wu's 3 consecutive strikes. He completely blocked and did not retreat half a step. His body only swayed a little. The power of the 3 consecutive strikes of the preliminary realm, profound realm, and extreme realm was still very strong. Nan Wu knew that he was in trouble when his consecutive strikes did not work. Before he could retreat, Chu Mu's sword stabbed out. In Nan Wu's eyes, the ordinary stab became a perfect sword that could not be dodged. Since he could not dodge, he could only take it head-on. However, it was only after blocking the attack that Nan Wu realized how powerful the sword was. Under the extreme mountain quake force, Nan Wu felt that his sword was about to fly out of his hand. He hurriedly clenched it, but the tyrannical vibration made him feel uncomfortable all over. He almost vomited blood and was directly sent flying. Chu Mu only made 1 stab. It looked so simple and ordinary, but it repelled Nan Wu. Chu Mu took a step forward and appeared in front of Nan Wu like a flash of lightning. He slashed out with his sword, which was still very ordinary. Nan Wu blocked it again and was sent flying again. The 3rd time, he slashed out with his sword. Nan Wu's sword was sent flying, and the tip of Chu Mu's sword stopped at Nan Wu's throat. He defeated Nan Wu with 3 strikes. Without saying anything, Chu Mu put his sword back into the sheath. He did not care about the exclamations, astonishment, and burning eyes of the surrounding outer palace disciples. He turned around and left, leaving only a shocking and admirable back view. Nan Wu picked up his sword and his expression changed. His eyes were full of disbelief and shock. He still could not react. He was defeated so thoroughly that it was beyond his imagination. Originally, he thought that he had improved enough, but he didn't expect the gap to grow bigger and bigger. Looking at Chu Mu's departing figure, he suddenly had a feeling that he could only look up to this figure for the rest of his life. He would never be able to catch up, let alone surpass him. Everyone looked at Chu Mu's back view and had the same thought as Nan Wu. This was a back view that people could only look up to. Chapter 851. Chu Mu had become a legend in the Outer Palace. Even Nan Wu, who had the late 7th Revolution sword intent and the late 7th Revolution profound, couldn't fight against him. How powerful he was had become an unsolved mystery. Like a brand, it was imprinted in the hearts of the Outer Palace disciples and could never be erased. Powerful, mysterious, low-key. Every day, Chu Mu continued to cultivate. Swordsmanship was a must, and he had to practice it every day. His sword origin had already reached its limit, so he temporarily put it aside. The Heavenly Wasteland sword physique had also reached the middle 3rd level, and the Heavenly Wasteland body refining liquid had been used up. Chu Mu also temporarily put it aside. As such, he had time, and most of it was used to refine his sword intent. The Ice Frost technique had been cultivated to its limit, and the Heart Sword secret record had met the requirements to cultivate, but he lacked time. After defeating Nan Wu, Chu Mu went into seclusion for another 3 months. When he came out, he heard a piece of news. 5 days ago, Nan Wu had successfully broken through the Origin Realm and became a Deity Condensation Realm swordsman. He had passed the Inner Palace assessment and become an Inner Palace disciple. Chu Mu smiled slightly. With Nan Wu's late 7th Revolution sword intent and profound, with his talent and potential, he would soon stand out among the Inner Palace disciples. A true genius would not be unknown no matter where he went. Silence was only temporary. After resting for a day, Chu Mu went into seclusion again. This time, he went into seclusion for a longer period of 5 months. The results were very obvious. His sword intent had finally reached the peak of the late 9th Revolution. Just a little bit more and he would reach the limit. It was just that the last step was not so easy to cross. Chu Mu was not in a hurry. He relaxed his mind and went out again. He went out for a walk, to see the scenery, and to relax his tense nerve. He heard another piece of news. 3 days ago, Qi Xiao, Luo Qiushui, Ben Hu, and Tu Jinghong had broken through the Origin Realm and reached the Deity Condensation Realm. They had also successfully passed the Inner Palace assessment and become new Inner Palace disciples. Their talents might not be as good as Nan Wu's, but the difference wasn't that great. After entering the Inner Palace, they would lay low for a period of time. Eventually, they would rise again and occupy a place among the Inner Palace disciples. However, the Inner Palace disciples were all very strong and talented. Therefore, it was not easy for Nan Wu to achieve a high ranking among the Inner Palace disciples in a short period of time. These former opponents had now all walked ahead of him. Chu Mu wasn't dejected at all. Instead, he let out a slight smile. Even if they broke through to the Divine Condensation Realm, they were also not Chu Mu's match. And if Chu Mu was willing, he could definitely break through to the Divine Condensation Realm in a short period of time and become an Inner Palace disciple. It was just that his way of thinking was a little more shocking and ambitious. After relaxing, Chu Mu went into seclusion again. Soon, his sword intent broke through and reached the limit of the 9th Revolution. Next, it was time to refine the metal profound. Based on the progress of his sword intent, it would take at least 1 to 2 years to refine the metal profound from the early 9th Revolution to the peak of the 9th Revolution. Chu Mu had the patience. Refine, continuously refine. When he was tired, he would come out of seclusion to take a break and then continue refining. Another year had passed, and the gold profound had finally reached the limit of the 9th revolution as he had wished. Chu Mu had entered the Heaven Wasteland Earth Palace and become an Outer Palace disciple for 4 years. Including the previous 2 years, he had left the Sky Edge Sword Palace in the immemorial world for about 6 years. Occasionally, Chu Mu would think of his friends in the Sky Edge Sword Palace and the bet he had with Xikongjian. He wondered if Xikongjian's Stardust Battle Team had reached the ranks of the Super Battle Teams, or had they surpassed the 3 Super Battle Teams. He also did not know when he would be able to return to the immemorial world and the Sky Edge Sword Palace. How was the Gentian Battle Team that he had created? It felt like 6 years had passed in an instant. 6 years was enough for the people of the Sky Edge Sword Palace to forget about him. Letting out a breath, Chu Mu did not plan to continue his seclusion. The Water Profound was at the early 6th revolution, the Space Profound was at the early 3rd revolution, and the other Profound were at the early 5th revolution. If he wanted to refine all of them to the peak of the 9th revolution, he did not know how long it would take. It might even take a few decades. To Chu Mu, a few years was nothing, but a few decades was a long time. If that's the case, let's enter the divine desolate secret domain again. Chu Mu thought to himself. The last time he entered the divine desolate secret domain, his cultivation was at the peak of the astral realm. The Sky Desolate Sword body was between the 2nd and 3rd level, while his Sword Intent and Metal Profound were at the peak of the 8th revolution. Now, his cultivation was still at the peak of the astral realm, without any improvement. However, the Sky Desolate Sword body had reached the middle of the 3rd level, while his Sword Intent and Metal Profound had reached the peak of the 9th revolution. His mental force had also transformed into spiritual force, which had increased significantly in the past few years. There was a huge gap between the peak of the 9th revolution and the peak of the 8th revolution. The difference in power was several times. With the improvement of his sword arts, the improvement of the Sky Desolate Sword body, the enhancement of his Sword Intent and Profound, as well as the tyrannical spiritual force, Chu Mu's current strength was probably enough to fight against the top 30 Inner Palace disciples. It had increased by more than 10 times. With his strength increasing by leaps and bounds, Chu Mu was even more confident. Moreover, when he broke through the seal and saw the palace, he was teleported out before he could even explore it. This time, the palace was one of his goals when he entered. To avoid trouble, Chu Mu once again applied to go out and train. He left the Sky Desolate Sacred Mountain and entered an intermediate danger zone. In fact, to Chu Mu, an intermediate danger zone was nothing. His goal was not to explore the intermediate danger zone, but to find a cover. After entering the intermediate danger zone, Chu Mu rapidly advanced. When the powerful strange beasts sensed the Sword Intent fluctuations emitted by Chu Mu, they immediately fled in fear. After finding a remote area, he swept out his tyrannical spiritual force like lightning. After confirming that there was no one around, Chu Mu took out the Divine Wilderness Secret Order. It was too important, so he had to be careful. His pure Sky Desolate Sword essence was injected into the Divine Wilderness Secret Order. The Divine Wilderness Secret Order was like a sponge, constantly absorbing the Sky Desolate Sword essence. Gradually, a layer of golden light was emitted from within. Not long after, the golden light wrapped Chu Mu and completely absorbed him. With a tremble, it rapidly shrunk, condensing into a dot. With another flash, it disappeared. After Chu Mu disappeared, a figure appeared where he disappeared. He gently smiled and muttered to himself, "This little guy is still very cautious. However, his luck and talent are indeed amazing. To be able to obtain the Divine Wilderness Secret Order. I wonder if he will be able to obtain the true inheritance after entering the Divine Wilderness Secret Realm again?" On a barren land, light flickered and distorted like ripples in water. A figure appeared. The familiar feeling that he had not felt in a long time appeared once again. Chu Mu had entered the divine wilderness secret realm once again. The first time he had entered with 30 inner palace disciples. This time, only Chu Mu had entered. Taking a deep breath, a barren aura surged over, wrapping around Chu Mu's body, making him feel extremely comfortable. Cultivating the sky desolate sword essence allowed him to adapt to such an environment. He felt like a fish in water. The current Chu Mu was many times stronger than before. Looking at the barren land and the boundless sky, the heroic spirit in his chest burst forth. He faced the sky and let out a long roar. The roar rumbled and pierced the clouds. The peak of the 9 revolutions sword intent instantly erupted. A nearly transparent silver light that was visible to the naked eye gushed out from Chu Mu's body. It condensed into an illusory divine sword that seemed to cut through everything. It soared into the sky, piercing through the vast sky. In this place there was no one else. Chu Mu was not worried that his true strength would be revealed to others. Therefore, he could release the full power of his sword intent without restraint. That carefree feeling was penetrating from inside out. In an instant, Chu Mu felt that his control over the power of his spiritual sense had increased. The gushing sword intent lasted for a while before it was withdrawn. The carefree feeling made Chu Mu feel as if his soul had been penetrated. Refreshing, it was extremely refreshing. With a laugh, Chu Mu moved forward. His speed was very fast. In a flash, he appeared dozens of meters away. He was much faster than the first time he entered. Along the way, he still encountered many desolate stones and some desolate-type spiritual herbs. However, Chu Mu did not deliberately collect them. Unless it was a king-grade desolate stone or a king-grade spiritual herb, Chu Mu was too lazy to bother with them. He wholeheartedly rushed forward. His speed was very fast. The mountain in the distance was getting closer and closer. He did not know how much time he had spent. He only felt that it was much faster than the first time he entered. Chu Mu once again arrived at the foot of the mountain. This mountain seemed to be the end of the divine desolate mystery realm. Standing at the foot of the mountain and looking up, it was still the same yellow-brown fog that lingered around the mountain. He could not see the end. I wonder if the trial altar will appear again? Chu Mu thought to himself. If the trial altar appeared again, this time, he would definitely be able to pass the 6th stage. Maybe he could even challenge the 7th stage. If he had a chance of passing it, the rewards he would receive would be unimaginable. With a trace of anticipation, Chu Mu moved. He turned into a wisp of smoke and floated up the mountain. Soon, he reached a height of 1,000 meters, but he didn't find any altars. He released his divine will, but he didn't find any. He continued to ascend until he reached a height of 2,000 meters, but he still didn't find any altars. He didn't find any altars at 3,000 meters and 4,000 meters. Looks like it's unique, Chu Mu said to himself. In other words, everyone who entered the divine desolate mystic realm only had one chance to challenge the trial altar, and also one chance to obtain a reward. Since that was the case, there was nothing to look forward to. Chu Mu set his sights on the palace. Chu Mu continued to ascend until he finally arrived at the place where he had bumped into the seal last time. The seal had appeared once more. Chu Mu studied it for a moment and found that the seal was the same as the previous time. It would not take him much time to break it. Chapter 852. After the seal was broken, a huge and majestic palace appeared before Chu Mu's eyes once again. This time, only Chu Mu saw it. The huge, yellow-brown palace had an indescribable majesty and vicissitude. It was as though it had existed for a very long time. It had been through countless years and had been washed by the river of time, leaving behind mottled marks and vicissitudes. As Chu Mu walked towards the palace, he felt a little stunned. The huge, ancient palace was like the residence of a god. Chu Mu could not help but feel like he was on a pilgrimage. He walked towards the huge palace step by step with some sincerity. The main doors of the palace were tightly shut. There was a huge signboard above. There were 4 ancient words on it, even more ancient than the words on the signboard of the heaven-desolate Earth Palace. Chu Mu did not recognize them. Hence, he did not know what was written on them. The main doors of the palace were 100 meters tall. When Chu Mu approached them again, he seemed extremely small. There were countless carvings on the doors. It was as though they were from the immemorial desolate era. It was as though they had a spirit. When they sensed Chu Mu approaching, the doors that had been closed for an unknown number of years trembled. It was as though dust had fallen off. Slowly, a small gap opened. Extremely dense and pure desolate chi immediately surged out from the gap. It was like a storm, almost blowing Chu Mu away. His long hair and clothes fluttered. This lasted for a while before the surging desolate chi storm weakened. Letting out a breath, Chu Mu calmed his somewhat excited heart. He took a step forward and walked through the gap in the doors. Even though it was just a gap, the 100-meter-tall doors were still very big. It was easy to enter. Standing outside the gap, it was dark inside. However, when he walked in, it was suddenly bright. Chu Mu looked at it in a daze. The huge palace was more than 1,000 meters tall. It occupied an area that was at least the size of 100 soccer fields. There were no pillars. The yellow-brown walls had traces of gold. There were countless carvings on the walls. There were many murals of people and beasts. There were all sorts of things. The murals recorded a world, an immemorial desolate era world. Chu Mu looked at the murals one by one. Unknowingly, he was attracted to them. His mind was immersed in them and he couldn't extricate himself. It was as if he had entered an ancient and desolate world, watching the scenes play back like a movie. Human swordsmen had fought against beasts, against the heavens, and against the non-human kind. They had survived and developed through countless battles. Step by step, they had survived through countless hardships in blood and fire. Scene after scene filled his heart with shock. Unyielding and unforgiving, pressing forward courageously, unstoppable sharpness, all of these were presented before Chu Mu's eyes, shocking his mind, making him feel that kind of throbbing, shocked, intoxicated, and suddenly enlightened. Humans, suddenly, an aged voice rang out like a sigh. It came from all directions and abruptly woke Chu Mu up. The immemorial desolate world in front of him instantly shattered and dissipated. It was as if he had passed through layers of time and space and returned to the enormous palace. Who is it? Chu Mu was surprised. He quickly looked around but did not see anyone. Human, I don't have a body. You can't see me. The ancient voice sounded again, as if it was an old man past his prime, with one foot in the grave. Human, I am the spirit of the divine desolate heavenly palace. You can call me Tianling, the ancient voice said again. Divine desolate heavenly palace. Chu Mu's mind naturally flashed with the words on the plaque above the huge palace's door. Following that, Chu Mu thought of the heaven desolate earth palace. Divine desolate heavenly palace. Heaven desolate earth palace. Tianling, tell me about the divine desolate heavenly palace. Chu Mu said. Entering the divine desolate heavenly palace, you have 2 choices. Tianling was silent for a moment. She did not have any intention of explaining the origins of the divine desolate heavenly palace. Instead, she said, first, leave the divine desolate heavenly palace. Second, accept the heavenly palace's test. After passing the test, you will receive the divine desolate's inheritance. Divine desolate inheritance. Chu Mu pondered and asked again, is the divine desolate inheritance a sword Dao inheritance? No. Tianling replied and fell silent again. If it was a sword Dao inheritance, Chu Mu would definitely reject it. He had his own path and perseverance, so it was impossible for him to give up. Since it was not a sword Dao inheritance, Chu Mu made his choice after some thought. I choose the second, Chu Mu said. There are a total of 9 stages in the test, and they are life-threatening. Tianling said very simply, you have 1 day to prepare. After one day, the test will begin. As Tian Ling's voice faded, a strange aura suddenly swept out, filling the entire divine desolate heavenly palace. It was as if something had changed. Chu Mu felt it, but he did not find anything. The first stage of the test was one day later. Chu Mu had one day to prepare. He sat down cross-legged and began to regulate his breathing. Although he did not know what the test was, it was beneficial for him to let his essence, energy, and spirit be at their peak. The day actually passed very quickly. The first stage of the test has begun. Survive and defeat all your opponents. An aged voice suddenly sounded. Immediately, Chu Mu felt the scenery around him change. The palace disappeared, and he found himself in a canyon passageway. Looking ahead, he could see no end, and looking behind him, he could see no end. Traces of yellowish-brown fog floated in the air, making it even more mysterious and making the atmosphere even more strange. A sharp sound tore through the air. It came from afar, and just as Chu Mu heard it, a figure appeared in front of him. As a cold light flashed, a sharp weapon tore through the air, grabbing at Chu Mu. Before his thoughts moved, his instincts acted first. The 8 desolate heaven swords were unsheathed. From bottom to top, the sword light was like lightning that tore through the night. It was also like cloth being cut. With a slight la-la sound, the attacking black shadow was instantly torn apart and dissipated. Before the sword was lowered, a second black shadow rushed out of the fog and appeared behind Chu Mu, launching a fatal attack. His feet moved lightly and his body turned, causing the black shadow's fatal attack to miss. The 8 desolate heaven swords slashed at a perfect arc, once again cutting the black shadow and dissipating it. On the other side, another black shadow appeared. One by one, the black shadows were torn apart and dissipated by Chu Mu's sword. Chu Mu also found that the speed of the black shadow was increasing, and so was its reaction. Gradually, Chu Mu felt the pressure. He could no longer kill the black shadow with one strike. The black shadow's attack speed was too fast. It was difficult to dodge perfectly just by relying on his footwork. He had to block with his sword. With a long, ear-piercing clang, Chu Mu felt his sword sink. The power of the black shadow was somewhat unexpected. In an instant, he launched the mountain-trembling energy, directly breaking the black shadow's attack. His sword slashed out, killing the black shadow. Almost at the same time, another black shadow appeared behind him. Like a peerless assassin, it was silent. The sharp claws in its hands flashed with an astonishing cold light. It viciously clawed down, wanting to tear Chu Mu's body apart. Chu Mu seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. His body spun at high speed, and the sword momentum was not exhausted. It drew a perfect arc, at an incredible angle, at a faster speed than the black shadow's claws, and slashed across the waist. Fight, fight, fight. Kill, 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 kill. Unceasingly fighting, unceasingly killing, there was no time to rest. Chu Mu could only muster his strength and unceasingly fight, because the moment he relaxed, he would be attacked by the black shadows and could be injured or even killed. Being injured here was a real injury. Dying here was also a real death. Once the black shadow was killed, it would dissipate and there would be no corpse. Therefore, Chu Mu did not know how many black shadows had died under his sword. The increase in the black shadow's strength was not obvious. With his strength, he could easily deal with it. However, the speed at which the black shadow disappeared and reappeared was too fast, and there was no pause. Chu Mu had no choice but to swing his sword again and again. The speed of his arm became faster and faster, and the speed of his sword also became faster and faster. If not for the fact that the heavenly wasteland sword physique had been cultivated to the middle of the 3rd level, which increased his strength, endurance, and explosive power by several times, he was afraid that he would not be able to hold on. Even now, Chu Mu began to feel his right arm sore. As he continued to swing his sword, continue to fight, and continue to kill the black shadow, the soreness in his right arm gradually expanded and spread throughout his entire arm. It even affected his sword-wielding movements. Dripping with sweat, Chu Mu's face gradually turned pale, but his eyes became brighter. Hold on, I must hold on. The first test seemed to have no end. Chu Mu could only continue to swing his sword and kill the Black Shadow, and continue to fight. Either you obtain a chance to live in battle, or you die in battle. Even though the Black Shadow's strength increased very quickly, the accumulation over a long period of time was still very impressive. With a ripping sound, Chu Mu's robe was torn apart by the cold light of the sharp claws, and his body was almost injured. Fortunately, his reaction was fast enough, and he immediately used the profound meaning of space. His figure flickered and he dodged the claws. With a counterattack, he killed his opponent in an instant. He could not feel the passage of time, and could not count the number of black shadows he had killed. A kind of loneliness filled his heart, as if it was going to seep into his soul. Hold on, continue to hold on, I will definitely pass. Another black shadow appeared, and it seemed to have comprehended the profound meaning of space. It flickered unpredictably, dodging Chu Mu's sword and counterattacking. His left arm was torn apart by the sharp claws, and blood instantly spurted out. The material of the claws seemed to be very special, and it caused Chu Mu's wound to be unable to heal in a short period of time. Furthermore, there was a force that constantly deepened the wound, making Chu Mu feel as if his wound was being cut by a saw. It was extremely painful. His tenacious will once again displayed its effect. Without a word, Chu Mu found the best opportunity. The 8 desolate heaven swords appeared from the blind spots, and with a stab, it pierced through the void, piercing through the black shadow. The black shadow dissipated once again. With his highly strung nerves, Chu Mu wanted to continue attacking, but no black shadow appeared. Immediately, the world in front of him distorted and changed. It was like 1,000 years, but it was also just an instant. Chu Mu returned to the divine desolate heavenly palace's grand hall. If not for the wound on his left arm and his sore right arm, he would have thought that it was just an illusion. Chapter 853. After passing the 6th test, you have 320 days to rest. After 320 days, you will begin the 7th test. The old voice of the heavenly spirit sounded out once again. Chu Mu's robes were torn and there were traces of blood. He looked a little miserable. The divine desolate heavenly palace's test had a total of 9 tests. Each test was more difficult and more dangerous than the previous one. At the 6th test, Chu Mu was injured. It was hard to imagine. If not for his sword intent and gold profound reaching the peak of the 9th revolution, his mind power transforming into divine sense, and his sky desolate sword body reaching the middle 3rd level, increasing his strength by more than 10 times, he probably would not have been able to pass the 3rd test. The tests in this place could lead to death. Chu Mu fought with all his might to pass one test after another. He realized that after every test, his rest time would be extended. For example, after passing the 1st test, he would be given 10 days of rest to adjust his condition before entering the 2nd test. After passing the 2nd test, his rest would be increased to 20 days. After passing the 3rd test, his rest would be extended to 40 days. Now that he had passed the 6th test, he received 320 days of rest. It was not a short period of time. In these days, other than adjusting his mind, energy, and spirit, Chu Mu also constantly cultivated. His water profound had reached the early 7th revolution, and his other profound meanings had also improved. He did not know why, but the efficiency of refining profound meanings in this place seemed to be higher than in the outside world. However, refining these profound meanings was for the future. It did not have any obvious help to his current strength. If the 6th test was already so difficult, then the 7th test would be even more difficult. Chu Mu's heart sank. He began to think about how to effectively increase his strength. The middle 3rd level of the sky desolate sword body was very difficult to improve, unless he had the sky desolate body refining liquid. Unfortunately, he had used it all. unless he made a breakthrough in his cultivation. As long as he was willing, his cultivation could break through to the divine condensation realm within half a month. At that time, his strength would greatly increase. However, that was a last resort. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Chu Mu would not do so. Once he did so, all his previous efforts would be wasted. As he thought about it, Chu Mu's eyes suddenly lit up. A book appeared in his hand. Heart Sword Secret Manual. The Heart Sword Secret Record had 2 requirements, but strictly speaking, there were 3. Sword Heart, Powerful Soul and Divine Willpower. Before, Chu Mu only possessed the sword heart and a powerful soul, but not the power of divine sense. He planned to cultivate it after breaking through to the spirit condensation realm. But now, because of the heavenly soul-spirit fusion pill, his spiritual will had transformed into divine sense, allowing him to completely fulfill the 3 conditions for cultivating the Heart Sword Secret Record. The heart-slaying sword of Gojoseon, because of the Heart Sword Secret Record, had the ability to kill powerful enemies above his level. The difference between a sword of Gojoseon and a divine condensation realm swordsman was even greater. The difference between each star was 10 times. To be able to kill someone of a higher level was enough to show how powerful the Heart Sword Secret Manual was. Thinking of this, Chu Mu calmed himself down and opened the Heart Sword Secret Record again. He didn't know if he could cultivate the Heart Sword Secret Record in 320 days. If he could, his strength would definitely increase again. Taking in a deep breath and exhaling slowly, Chu Mu focused his attention on the Heart Sword Secret Record. He read through it word by word, carefully comprehending it. After a while, he finished reading the book that wasn't thick to begin with. Closing the book, Chu Mu also closed his eyes. His brain was working at high speed, and his thoughts were extremely fast. From beginning to end, he once again comprehended the contents of the book several times. The Heart Sword Secret Record was a special cultivation method. It was between a main cultivation method and a support cultivation method. There was no conflict between them, and the cultivation method was also rather unique. Simply put, cultivating the Heart Sword Secret Record was to use the power of divine sense to spread throughout the body, absorbing a unique power from the body, and finally gathering it in the heart to form the Heart Sword Force. The Heart Sword Force was a very special power. It couldn't be used to attack directly, but it could strengthen the power of the sword. It was very mysterious. The Heart Sword Secret Record was divided into 3 levels, also known as the 3 heavens of Heart Sword. The first heaven of Heart Sword, Sword Shadow Kill. The second heaven of Heart Sword, Sword Heart's Shadow. The third heaven of Heart Sword Cut the Sky. The Heart Sword Force in the first and second heavens didn't have direct destructive power, but in the third heaven, it had direct destructive power. Moreover, according to the literal speed, it seemed to be very powerful and terrifying. The 3 heavens of the Heart Sword naturally followed the order. One would start cultivating from the first heavens. Only after mastering the first heavens would one be able to cultivate the second heavens and then the third heavens. Temporarily putting aside the contents of the second and third layer of heaven, Chu Mu focused on the first layer of Heart Sword's cultivation chant. It had to be said that the Heart Sword Secret Record was very profound. It was more than 10 times more profound than the Ice Soul Frost art. Fortunately, Chu Mu's perception had increased a lot due to the transformation of his divine sense into divine sense. Strictly speaking, there were actually 4 conditions to cultivate the Heart Sword Secret Record. Sword Heart, a powerful soul, the power of divine sense, and a high level of perception. This level of perception was a hidden requirement. If one's perception wasn't enough, there was no way to comprehend the methods in the Heart Sword Secret Record. How could one cultivate it? Discarding all distracting thoughts, Chu Mu began to cultivate the first heaven of Heart Sword according to the method. The divine sense was mobilized. Fortunately, the recent cultivation and constant battles had deepened Chu Mu's grasp of the divine sense. Although he still hadn't reached the level of control of his divine sense, it didn't hinder his cultivation. As described in the method, Chu Mu controlled the powerful divine sense to spread from the head to the entire head, then down to the neck, shoulders, chest, arms, and so on. The coverage of the divine sense had to be omnidirectional. No place could be missed. This required a certain degree of control of the divine sense. Moreover, after the coverage, the divine sense still had to stay. While controlling the divine sense to stay, one had to control the divine sense to continue spreading to the whole body. It was a difficult task. At first, it was easy to achieve. As the divine sense continued to spread, the difficulty of control became greater. When the divine sense spread to the legs, there was a sudden fluctuation and instability. The divine sense in the body collapsed instantly. It failed. Withdrawing the divine sense and resting for a while, Chu Mu tried a second time. During the attempt, his control of the divine sense improved further. After failing more than 10 times in a row, on the 16th time, the divine sense finally spread to every part of his body as he wished. It spread to every piece of flesh on his body, down to the edge of his toenails. Nothing was missed. Next, he had to maintain this state. He had to imagine that every part of his body had a kind of power which was a kind of potential. He had to use the divine sense to spread throughout his body to feel and touch it. This required a very firm belief that there was a tyrannical special power in his body. If the thought wavered even a little, he wouldn't be able to cultivate successfully. Without a trace of distracting thoughts in his mind, Chu Mu continued to control the divine sense to spread to every part of his body. At the same time, he firmly believed that his body contained infinite potential. This was also very difficult. Fortunately, when Chu Mu focused his attention, the effects were very obvious. As time passed, Chu Mu gradually felt that every part of his body seemed to have a faint warmth, yet also seemed to be an icy cold wave. It was very strange. Yes, this was just like the description in the Heart Sword Secret Record. It was a kind of magical power fluctuation. As he continued to strengthen his perception of this kind of power fluctuation, it became clearer little by little. The air around Chu Mu also seemed to be affected, producing fluctuations that formed ripples that were invisible to the naked eye and spread out little by little. Gradually, the fluctuation disappeared and turned to the inside of his body. It's time. Like a subconscious murmur, Yang Kai controlled the power of his divine sense to completely come into contact with that mysterious force, mixing it like water and milk. Using the power of his divine sense as a guide, this mysterious force flowed out from every corner of his body, all flowing towards his heart. Chu Mu's consciousness could clearly see that countless streams had appeared in every part of his body. They trickled endlessly and formed a complex system. That was the so-called potential hidden in the body, a kind of power. The human body was like the universe. It was very mysterious and contained countless mysteries. Endless mysteries were hidden in it. It depended on whether it could be developed. Strictly speaking, the Heart Sword Secret Record was a special cultivation method to develop one's own potential. The power in his body gradually gathered and poured into his heart, stopping there. His heart seemed to have become a new dantian. The power kept pouring in and increasing little by little. When the power filled his heart, this step was completed. Next, he would proceed to the next step, which was to refine this power. Yi Shiwen withdrew his divine sense from his body, and then mobilized his sword origin. Strands of sword essence and other ultimacies were also mobilized and poured into his heart along with a strand of divine sense. They mixed with the special power and formed a whirlpool that constantly rotated. Gradually, all kinds of power gathered at his heart. As they mixed, they gradually condensed into a brand new power. Chu Mu could not actively participate in this process. He could only watch from the side with his consciousness and wait for the new power to appear. Time passed slowly. Chu Mu waited very patiently. Gradually, he could feel the power in his heart, rotating at a high speed, gradually condensing into a point and almost solidifying. After a while, all the power in his heart finally turned into a round bead. It beat with his heart and then exploded, attacking every part of his heart as if it was going to explode into pieces. Chapter 854. Chu Mu felt as if his heart was about to explode and his soul was about to scatter. At the same time, he felt as if he had been reborn. It was as if he was wandering between heaven and hell, struggling between despair and hope. Finally, everything returned to silence. Chu Mu saw that his heart was enveloped by a transparent force. It was as if there was a layer of medium protecting his heart. It was a new kind of force. According to the description of the Heart Sword secret record, it was the so-called Heart Sword force. The outside of the heart was enveloped by the Heart Sword force. Inside the heart was the source of the Heart Sword force. It was like a dantian that was filled with the Heart Sword force. The Heart Sword force was very tough. This was the first impression Chu Mu had when his consciousness came in contact with it. Then, with a thought, the Heart Sword force was obedient like an obedient lamb. Under Chu Mu's control, it flowed and appeared on his fingers. The transparent force could not be seen, but it could be clearly felt. This force was very tough, but it did not have the slightest bit of offensive power. Had Chu Mu already mastered the first heaven of the Heart Sword secret record? No, strictly speaking, he had only cultivated the Heart Sword force. He had not truly mastered the first heaven of the Heart Sword. However, cultivating the Heart Sword force was a good start. He tried the Heart Sword force. It did not have any offensive power, but it was shockingly flexible. It enveloped his heart and formed a strong layer of defense that could better protect his heart. It must be known that in the human body, apart from the head, the heart was a vital point. If the other organs were pierced or cut, it would not lead to immediate death. But once the heart was damaged, it was very easy to die. Even powerful swordsmen could only hold on for a little longer. Of course, if there were elixirs, the heart could still be repaired before death. However, the heart was a vital point. If it was damaged, it would affect the body more than the other organs. Although Chu Mu would not let others hit his heart, no one could predict that. It was always a good thing to have the protection of the Heart Sword force. With the Heart Sword force, Chu Mu began to cultivate the first heaven of the Heart Sword, Sword Shadow Kill. It took him half a month to cultivate the Heart Sword force. Fortunately, he had rested for 332 days, so he still had a lot of time left. Unceasingly cultivating, other than the first layer of Heart Sword, Chu Mu didn't give up on refining his profound. This was something that had to be done. As his strength increased, so did his potential. His water profound had reached the early stage of the 7th revolution, but the tempering speed was still impressive. Other than Chu Mu's spiritual sense, it was also due to the fact that he was in the divine desolate heavenly palace. Time flowed by. 320 days passed by one day after another. The 7th test was getting closer and closer. Chu Mu's strength was also increasing bit by bit. The cultivation of the first sky of Heart Sword, the refinement of the water profound meaning, the cultivation of sword arts, and so on did not stop. Chu Mu didn't know what the 7th test was, but he attached great importance to it. Chu Mu unsheathed his sword and looked ahead, as if his enemy was standing there. Chu Mu's spirit was unprecedentedly focused. All the strength in his body was under his control. He mobilized it, ready to unleash it. The Heart Sword force in his heart was like a soldier on standby, ready to be deployed at any time. In an instant, Chu Mu slashed out with his sword. The sword light condensed into a line. The blade was distinct and cut through the air in front of it. At the same time, the Heart Sword force flowed at high speed, infusing into the sword at lightning speed. A miraculous scene appeared. After Chu Mu slashed out with the sword light, a blurry sword shadow appeared. The sword shadow and the sword light formed a 15-degree split, striking the same spot in the air. Without a target, Chu Mu didn't know how powerful the sword shadow was. According to the records of the Heart Sword Secret Manual, the power of the sword shadow should be 50% of the original sword. First heaven of the Heart Sword, Sword Shadow Kill. As the name implied, it was to split out a sword shadow and form a second attack in an extremely short period of time, striking the same spot on the target and increasing the damage. The sword shadow was formed after the Heart Sword Force was activated. At the small success stage, the sword shadow and sword light would split apart and strike the same spot. Although it was fast, there was still a time gap. Those who had a good grasp of the timing could often avoid it. If one practiced it to Deshang, the sword light and sword shadow would merge into one and strike the target at the same time, causing greater damage. Moreover, the swordsman would be able to control the separation of the sword shadow and sword light to damage the surroundings of the target. It was very powerful. Now, Chu Mu had only practiced it to the small success stage. Without an opponent and a target, he couldn't try it to his heart's content. It would be difficult to defeat Deshang. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, 320 days had passed. Sword Shadow Kill was at the peak of the small success stage. He was only one step away from Deshang. The 7th round of the trial had begun. The scene changed again. Chu Mu was calm because he was already used to it. The test this time was different from the previous ones. In front of him, there was a black stone tablet and a crystal pedestal. The black stone tablet and the crystal pedestal were both 3 meters tall. They were side by side in front of Chu Mu, emitting a strange aura. Chu Mu was surprised to find that there was a figure in the crystal pedestal. It looked like a human, but at the same time, it didn't look like a human. The figure seemed to be sleeping. As for the black stone tablet, it was one with him. There were no traces or words. The 7th test. Before the sinner breaks the seal, break the stone tablet. The old voice of the heavenly spirit sounded. As soon as the voice fell, Chu Mu saw that starting from the top of the crystal pedestal, it started to melt bit by bit like ice. With a thought, Chu Mu quickly drew his sword and slashed at the black stone tablet in front of him. A clanging sound rang out and countless sparks flew. A powerful force almost knocked the sword out of Chu Mu's hand. There was only a faint white mark left on the stone tablet. Chu Mu was shocked by the hardness of the black stone tablet. Seeing that the crystal pedestal was melting bit by bit from the top, he didn't dare to waste any time. He removed the force of the rebound and loosened his grip. He then tightened his grip on the 8-sided desolate sky sword and mobilized all his strength. The Heart Sword Force was also activated. Kill. The sword slashed at the black stone tablet. At the position of the first slash, the sword light shattered. Before the sword was knocked away, the sword shadow also slashed down. Sword Shadow Kill. Following that, the sword shadow also shattered. The white mark on the black stone tablet became even more obvious. Chu Mu wasn't sure how long it would take for the crystal pedestal to melt. But one thing was for sure. Once the crystal pedestal melted and the figure inside broke out of the seal, it definitely wouldn't be his friend. According to the difficulty of the previous 6 tests, once the figure in the crystal pedestal broke out of the seal in the 7th test, he probably wouldn't be a match for it. It was very likely that he would be killed. In order to survive, in order to pass the 9th test, Chu Mu gave it his all. He used all of his strength in every slash. The Heavenly Baron Sword Essence, the Ultimate 9th Revolution Sword Intent, the Ultimate 9th Revolution Gold Profound, the Ultimate Mountain Quake Force, the impact of the Spiritual Force, the Heart Sword Force, all of his strength was restrained, exploding out in the form of the initial stage, the advanced stage, and the ultimate stage. The Heavenly Baron 3 styles 3 consecutive slashes, each slash carrying the sword Shadow Kill of the Heart Sword Force. Its power was even more tyrannical. Such power was enough to instantly kill most of the great circle of the God Condensation Realm swordsmen. He didn't know what material this black stone tablet was made of. Under Chu Mu's continuous attacks, the damage to it was actually only a little. Kill, kill, kill! Slash, slash, slash. Using almost all of his strength, Chu Mu continuously slashed out with his sword. On one side of the crystal seat, a portion of it had already melted. The human figure inside also revealed a head. Immediately, a weak, yet terrifying aura spread out, causing Chu Mu to be terrified. He trembled from the bottom of his heart. He was completely sure that once this thing broke out of the seal, he would probably be instantly killed. The shadow of death shrouded him. The pressure of life and death crushed Chu Mu, and it also stimulated his potential bit by bit. Slash, slash, slash. The angle of Chu Mu's sword slashes became more and more perfect. The speed of the sword became faster, and the power that exploded out in an instant was also more tyrannical. The three styles of Heavenly Baron became more and more smooth. The consumption of energy was also less and less, and the power was also more and more powerful. Unknowingly, it was as if he had broken through some shackles. When he slashed out with his sword, the heart sword force poured in. The sword shadow didn't split up, but instead merged with the sword light, and slashed at the stone tablet at the same time. With a "kacha" sound, a conspicuous crack appeared on the stone tablet that had been continuously attacked by Chu Mu. Sword shadow killed Deshang. Although the power didn't increase, the controllability increased. On the other side of the crystal pedestal, the entire head of the figure inside was revealed. His eyes were tightly shut, and the crystal pedestal was still melting. Chu Mu seemed to have forgotten everything. He was immersed in the process of slashing out with his sword. He constantly slashed out with his sword in order to shatter the black stone tablet before the crystal pedestal completely melted. The unprecedented pressure of death greatly stimulated Chu Mu's potential. It constantly stimulated his potential, and his attainments in swordsmanship increased once again. Not long after, another cracking sound rang out, and another crack appeared on the stone tablet. Because he was constantly slashing out with his sword, every strike strived for perfection, striving for the strongest power. Therefore, his understanding of the Heavenly Baron's sword technique was constantly deepening. The power of the three styles of Heavenly Baron was increasing at a perceptible speed. The peak of the ninth revolution sword intent and the profound of metal were fully developed. They were integrated into the sword and then instantly exploded. In the unseen world, the spirit of the divine Baron Heavenly Palace was coldly watching this scene. It still remembered that the previous few people who had entered the divine Baron Heavenly Palace had failed to shatter the stone tablet before the crystal pedestal melted. In the end, the person in the crystal pedestal broke out of the seal and was directly crushed by the terrifying strength. It had been many years since the divine Baron Heavenly Palace had an inheritor. As the spirit of the divine Baron Heavenly Palace, it naturally hoped that someone could obtain the inheritance of the Heavenly Palace and bring it to greater heights. Perhaps after many years, the primordial world had already forgotten about the divine Baron Heavenly Palace. It thought highly of the person who passed the ninth test. He had great potential. It hoped that he could pass the ninth test and obtain the inheritance of the Heavenly Palace. Chapter 855. Another cracking sound rang out as another crack appeared on the wall. Unknowingly, over a dozen cracks had appeared on the black stone tablet. The shorter ones were a dozen centimeters long and the longer ones were 30 centimeters long. And on the other side, the crystal throne had already melted to the figure's waist. The aura it emitted was much stronger and more terrifying, nearly suffocating Chu Mu. The pressure of death increased, but it also stimulated Chu Mu's potential. His blood began to boil. For survival, for the path of the sword, for himself, for everything at a glance, the stone tablet was filled with sword light. It was as if countless swords were slashing at it at the same time. The number of cracks gradually increased until they covered the entire black stone tablet. The 3-meter-tall black stone tablet looked as if it would shatter at the slightest touch. But in truth, it was still very hard. As for the crystal throne, it had already melted to the figure's thigh. Burning blood transformation. Chumu felt that the time was about right. He didn't hesitate to activate the large success burning blood transformation. His essence blood collided, creating sparks that ignited. The tyrannical energy was like a flood that burst through a dam, surging out from within. It struck his entire body, filling it with energy. Outside Chumu's body, a faint layer of blood-red flames burned. The blade of his sword was also covered in a layer of blood-red flames. The sword light turned blood-red, strange and shocking. The strength of each sword strike doubled, reaching 3 times the original strength. The reason why he didn't use Deshang's burning blood transformation from the start was because Chumu knew that he couldn't maintain it for too long. Otherwise, once his blood essence was exhausted, it would be extremely disadvantageous to him. It would damage his foundation and threaten his life. Thus, it was best to use it at the right time. Now, the stone tablet was covered in cracks. It had reached the final juncture. He increased the strength of his attacks, and the crystal throne had already melted to the figure's foot. Once the crystal pedestal melted, he would break out of the seal. It was as if Chumu did not see it. He was not disturbed and continued to attack with all his strength. The cracks on the black stone tablet continued to expand. At this critical moment, the crystal pedestal had already melted to the bottom of his feet. The eyelids of the human figure that was emitting a terrifying aura trembled. His fingers also trembled as he slowly opened his eyes. An indescribably cold gaze released a world-shaking violence, as if it wanted to destroy the world. Chumu's sword light paused and dispersed. The blood-red flames on his body also tottered, as if they were about to be annihilated. His heart trembled, and so did the power of the heart sword. His soul trembled, and a feeling of insignificance arose in his heart. In an instant, Chumu was filled with despair. He might as well give up. In any case, the person in the crystal pedestal had already broken out of the seal, and he was still unable to shatter the stone tablet. Time was up, he could only welcome death. Negative emotions immediately erupted from the bottom of his heart. It was like a flash flood, or a volcano that had been dormant for many years had erupted. It nearly destroyed Chumu's reason. No! His heart was struggling and resisting. With a roar, Chumu's will that was about to sink was awakened. Like a lighthouse in the darkness, like a glimmer of hope in despair, Chumu grasped it in an instant. Unyielding and unyielding, pressing forward with indomitable will, courage, tenacity, wisdom, sharpness, etc. All of these burst forth in Chumu's mind. It was as if he had experienced the primordial world depicted in the divine desolate heavenly palace's murals. He had fought against humans, other races, and the heavens and earth. He had grown and developed through all sorts of life and death struggles, and finally stood tall in the primordial world, becoming one of the strongest races. This quality was being displayed on Chumu's body. It was being strengthened. Unknowingly, Chumu's body was emitting a primordial aura, but it was still very weak. His potential erupted. It was a super eruption. In a true life and death crisis, Chumu used all of his strength. The power of the ice soul, the power of the earth's core desolate flame, all of his strength, including the power of the burning blood transformation and the burning of his blood essence, were all unleashed. With a stroke of luck, the first and second styles of the 3 styles of heavenly desolate merged into one sword. The power of the initial boundary and the advanced boundary also merged into one. This sword, the strongest sword, was several times stronger than the 3rd style of the 3 styles of heavenly desolate. In an instant it slashed out. The power of the heart sword was poured in, and the sword shadow kill erupted. The beautiful sword light was like a divine light that cut through the primordial chaos. After fusing with the sword shadow kill, its power increased once again. This sword was also Chumu's final sword. If he could not shatter the stone tablet, he would be torn to pieces by the awakened figure that had broken the seal. A chance of survival was just inches away. If the stone tablet did not shatter, he would die. This was a sword with all of his strength, a sword with all of his hopes on it. The dazzling sword light bombarded the stone tablet that was full of cracks, and a cracking sound rang out again. At the same time, the person who had broken the seal also slowly raised his arm, stretched out a finger, and pointed it at Chu Mu. At the tip of his finger, a wisp of faint light condensed. The surrounding space instantly shattered, and rays of black light danced. In a series of cracking sounds, the beautiful sword light slashed down. The stone tablet was instantly torn to pieces, exploded, and turned into countless fragments that sputtered in all directions. The faint light became thicker and instantly solidified. The cold eyes of the figure changed, filled with unwillingness. Just as he was about to open his mouth, as if to shout something, the crystal throne appeared again. From the bottom of his feet it instantly spread upwards. Its speed was incomparably fast, and in an instant, the figure was sealed again. The blood-red flames dissipated. Chu Mu's face was pale, and he was dripping with sweat. He looked very miserable, and his entire body was sore and weak. In an instant, he felt that he was about to die. He really did not want to experience such a feeling a second time. The environment changed, and Chu Mu once again returned to the grand hall of the divine desolate heavenly palace. He quickly sat down cross-legged, and took out the relevant pills to recover his burnt blood essence and sword essence, as well as the power of his spiritual sense and the power of the heart sword. Congratulations, human! You have passed the 7th stage. Before the 8th stage begins, you have 640 days to cultivate. The old voice of the heavenly spirit sounded once again. The content had changed, and the tone seemed to be gentler. The reason why he was able to pass the 7th stage was directly related to cultivating the 1st stage of the Heart Sword Secret Manual, Sword Shadow Kill. The sword shadows produced by Sword Shadow Kill had 50% of the attack power. After using it many times, the accumulated killing power was still very impressive. If he did not have Sword Shadow Kill, it meant that Chu Mu would need to spend even more time to shatter the stone tablet. And this time it was still so dangerous. Just a slight difference in time, and he almost failed. The result of failure would have been death. Sword Shadow Kill was extremely important. Thinking back to the 7th stage, it was truly soul-stirring. After passing it, the rewards were also very generous. Firstly, it was Sword Shadow Kill Deshang. Secondly, it was the continuous strengthening of the 3 styles of heavenly desolation. Finally, it was the fusion of the 1st and 2nd styles. As long as the 3rd style was fused, the 3 styles of heavenly desolation would become one. It was equivalent to truly mastering the heavenly desolation sword technique and comprehending the profoundness within. It was equivalent to taking half a step into the realm of one with the sword. To truly achieve one with the sword was not a difficult task. It took Chu Mu a full day's time to completely recover his cultivation, the power of the heart sword, and the power of his spiritual sense. His blood essence had also recovered. However, the recovery of the earth core desolate flame and ice essence power was very slow. Without external help, the effect was minimal. Both the extreme ice pills and the geocentric lotus seed had been used up. He could only let these 2 powers recover bit by bit in the coming days. Fortunately, he still had 639 days left. If he could recover a little each day, he should be able to fully recover before the 8th stage. No matter how dangerous it was, he had finally passed the 7th stage. Chu Mu's strength had also increased significantly. Next, he had to make good use of the remaining 600 days to further increase his strength so that he could pass the 8th stage. As for what the 8th stage would be, he did not know. He could only be fully prepared to face it. The Heart Sword Secret Manual had 3 stages. He had already mastered the 1st stage. Next, he had to cultivate the 2nd stage, Sword Heart Shadow. He also had to strengthen his swordsmanship cultivation. Due to the breakthrough in the Heavenly Desolation sword technique, Chu Mu predicted that his swordsmanship attainments would increase significantly in the coming days. Thirdly, his water profound had already been tempered to the 8th revolution. He had to strive to temper his water profound to the limit of the 9th revolution before the 8th stage began. As such, when the 9th revolution of the metal profound and the 9th revolution of the water profound alternated, there might be a miraculous effect. If the two were to fuse, the power would increase exponentially. The second stage of the heart sword, sword heart shadow, was more than 10 times more difficult than the first stage, sword shadow kill. Fortunately, Chu Mu's perception was astonishing. With the foundation of the first stage, his swordsmanship attainments were extremely profound. All of these things made it convenient for him. The so-called sword heart shadow was to expand and strengthen sword shadow kill. It was to develop the sword light's sword shadows into everything. There were both sword shadows and human shadows. He already had the sword shadows. The difficulty lay in the human shadows. This was because the human body was many times larger than the sword. Chu Mu had monstrous perception. He also had outstanding willpower and endurance. He firmly believed that he could master it before the 8th stage began. Inside the divine desolate heavenly palace, Chu Mu could clearly feel the passage of time. He knew that every day had passed. A day had 24 hours. 10 hours were used to cultivate the second stage of the Heart Sword Secret Manual. This was because this was the most effective way to increase his strength in a short period of time. 8 hours were used to temper his water profound, 4 hours were used to cultivate his swordsmanship, and the remaining 2 hours were used to rest. Humans were not made of iron. An appropriate amount of rest would help one's cultivation. Furthermore, the time spent resting was also the time to reflect on the day's cultivation. Tidying up and emptying one's mind was even more beneficial. The day's tense nerves would be relaxed, allowing one to obtain sufficient rest. It would be more helpful for one's future cultivation. Cultivating like this was the same as going into seclusion. It was lonely and most people would find it unbearable. However, Chu Mu enjoyed it. He had almost forgotten about the outside world. His heart was only focused on cultivating and becoming stronger. He would pass the 8th stage, and then the 9th stage. Chapter 856. 640 days passed in the blink of an eye. After 2 years of hard work, Chu Mu's strength had increased significantly. His sword mastery had increased significantly, and his sword domain had risen from the 9th level to the early 10th level. His water profound had also been refined to the limit of the 9th revolution, standing side by side with the metal profound. For the 3rd profound, Chu Mu chose the wood profound after some consideration. He decided to first refine the 5 elements profound to the limit of the 9th revolution. Since the metal profound was the first to reach the limit of the 9th revolution, he chose the water profound for the 2nd profound. Because the 5 elements mutually reinforced and restrained each other, Chu Mu chose to reinforce each other. Metal begets water. For the 3rd profound, he chose the wood profound because water begets wood. Once the wood profound reached the limit of the 9th revolution, Chu Mu would choose the fire profound for the 4th profound, and then the earth profound. While he was refining the water profound, he also used a portion of the demonic crystal's energy to refine the other profound. After a long time, they had all improved. The space profound had risen from the initial 3rd revolution to the middle 3rd revolution, and the other profound had risen from the initial 5th revolution to the limit of the 5th revolution. When 640 days passed, Chu Mu's wood profound had also improved greatly, reaching the late 7th revolution. The ice power of the Ice Soul Frost technique had completely recovered, and so had the Earth Core Desolate Flame. All of his power had recovered, and his strength had improved significantly. The 8th stage begins. The old voice of the heavenly spirit resounded, and the environment changed again. Chu Mu was calm and composed. The improvement in his strength made him confident that he could deal with anything. After the change, the scene stabilized. Chu Mu stood on a circular platform. The platform was 100 meters in diameter, and in the middle, there was a 3-meter-tall, transparent, sword-shaped crystal stele. Inside the transparent crystal stele, there was a half-meter-long sword that seemed to be sealed inside. On the 4 sides of the platform there was a passage. There was a misty fog that spread out, and the end couldn't be seen. It was unknown what was inside the fog, but it looked very mysterious, and there was a heart-palpitating aura coming from it. The 8th test, guard the sword spirit, the old voice said again. Guardian sword spirit. Chu Mu looked back at the 3-meter-tall crystal sword stele thoughtfully. Since it was a guardian, there would be enemies. Chu Mu's gaze swept across the 4 passageways in all directions. Perhaps that was where the enemies came from. The enemy had not appeared yet, but Chu Mu was already on high alert. His essence, energy, and spirit were at their peak, ready to fight at any time. The difficulty of the 7th stage was so high, and the difficulty of the 8th stage would be at the 7th stage. The increase in his strength made him more confident, but at the same time, he also became more cautious. Once the 8th stage was over, it would be the 9th stage. Once the 9th stage was over, all 9 stages would be cleared, and victory would be right in front of their eyes. Time passed by slowly. This kind of vigilant waiting was the most torturous. A quarter of an hour later, Chu Mu heard a faint sound that gradually grew louder. In the passageway in front of him, a figure appeared in the misty fog. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw figures appearing in the passageways on both sides. He released his spirit sense, and figures appeared in the passageway behind him as well. Enemies from 4 different passageways had finally appeared. In Chu Mu's heart, he could not help but feel a little bit of excitement. The figure finally rushed out of the fog and ran over at a very fast speed. It was a strange humanoid creature that ran upright like a human. It wore simple leather armor, but it also had 2 arms and 2 legs. Its skin was coarse green, and its head was ferocious with protruding fangs. It wasn't very tall, but its body was very strong. Its muscles were like rocks, and it contained a lot of power. One by one, the green-skinned imps held weapons such as machetes and axes. Their bodies emitted a fierce aura as they ran in an orderly manner. Their eyes were shining with a scarlet luster as they stared at the crystal sword stele, ignoring Chu Mu. Under the cover of his spirit sense, Chu Mu could clearly determine the strength of these green-skinned imps. They were equivalent to a beginning Origin Realm swordsman. To Chu Mu, this kind of strength was very weak. The green-skinned imps continued to rush out of the passageway and onto the platform, heading straight for the crystal sword stele in the middle. They completely ignored Chu Mu. He unsheathed his sword and slashed out an arc of light. In an instant, it flew past. Poochie sounds could be heard as green blood splattered across the sky. More than a dozen green-skinned imps were instantly killed. Chu Mu's actions attracted the attention of a portion of the green-skinned imp. They turned around and rushed towards Chu Mu. However, there were even more green-skinned imps that rushed towards the crystal sword stele. Their goal was to destroy the crystal sword stele and the sword spirit within. As long as the sword spirit was destroyed, Chu Mu would fail the test. It was unknown what the consequences would be, but he would definitely not be able to obtain the inheritance of the divine desolate heavenly palace. However, they were merely at the beginning Origin Realm. To Chu Mu they were like ants. He unsheathed his sword and a sword ray broke through the sky. With the infusion of the profound of metal, a golden crescent moon sliced through the sky, instantly taking away dozens of lives. The green-skinned imps were not afraid of death. Even if they were easily killed, a portion of them still rushed towards Chu Mu. Even if they couldn't kill Chu Mu, they still wanted to restrain him and let the majority of the green-skinned imps destroy the crystal sword stele. How could Chu Mu let them succeed? His figure flashed as he appeared beside the crystal sword stele. He brandished his sword and a sword ray tore through the sky. The sharpness of the profound of metal was displayed to the extreme. Every sword strike would take the lives of dozens of green-skinned imps. Green blood splattered all over the platform and the surroundings. A fishy stench permeated the air, and gradually became thicker. With a sword in hand, he slaughtered in all directions. Chu-Mu quickly circled around the crystal sword steel. He unsheathed his sword and cut down one green-skinned imp after another as if he was chopping vegetables. To Chu-Mu, the green-skinned imps were indeed powerful. However, they were slow, had slow reactions, and were weak. They were no different from ants. No matter how many of them there were, they were just food. Around the crystal sword steel, there were large amounts of corpses. Chu-Mu didn't know just how many green-skinned imps had perished beneath his sword. The last green-skinned imp also fell beneath Chu-Mu's sword. Chu-Mu let out a long breath. The rich and pungent stench caused him to frown. Looking around, the ground was littered with green-skinned imp corpses. On the platform and the 4 tunnels, corpses were piled up like mountains. Green blood had gathered into a lake. It was like a slaughterhouse. Chu-Mu didn't feel any discomfort from such a slaughter. The sword was a vicious weapon, and sword techniques were killing technique. This was his philosophy, and it was deeply engraved into his soul. Looking at the crystal sword steel, it wasn't damaged at all. It hadn't even been touched by the green-skinned imp. Killing these green-skinned imps didn't consume much strength. But Chu-Mu was able to completely replenish his energy. The corpses piled up like mountains and the lake of blood began to slowly fade. After a quarter of an hour, all the corpses and blood had completely disappeared without a trace. Everything returned to its original state, as if everything had been reset. The previous slaughter was like an illusion. A strange aura appeared in the air. Chu-Mu had a premonition that the second wave of attacks was about to arrive. Just as he expected, in the fog of the 4 tunnels, more figures appeared. Their speed was several times faster than the green-skinned imp. Spiders, 8-clawed spiders. Their bodies were multicolored, and they seemed to be filled with a potent poison. These 8-clawed spiders weren't small. They were like large millstones, enough to cover an adult man. The 8-clawed spiders were much faster. They rapidly ran over, and a sour stench filled the air. The 8-clawed spiders seemed to be more intelligent than the green-skinned imps. They knew that Chu-Mu would stop them from destroying the crystal sword steel. Therefore, a portion of the 8-clawed spiders rushed towards Chu-Mu. They raised their blade-like forelegs and chopped down towards Chu-Mu's head. The sword light flashed across the air. The 8-clawed spiders all trembled. Dark green liquid sprayed out as they fell forward. Chu-Mu turned into a wisp of smoke and appeared on the other side, taking away the lives of even more 8-clawed spiders. The 8-clawed spiders were much faster than the green-skinned imp. Their strength was also stronger, reaching the peak of the origin realm. Most of the 8-clawed spiders still rushed towards the crystal sword steel in an attempt to destroy it. Kill! 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 The surroundings of the crystal sword steel had become a dangerous place. A figure was rapidly circling around. Wherever he went, dark green liquid splashed everywhere. Corpses of 8-clawed spiders fell to the ground, one after another. Immersed in the slaughter, Chu-Mu seemed to have forgotten everything around him. All he could do was kill, 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 and kill. Every time an 8-clawed spider approached, he would kill it one by one. Every 15 minutes, a new wave of monsters would appear. They were all different kinds of monsters. They were getting stronger and stronger, and their skills were also increasing. The pressure on Chu-Mu to protect the sword spirit gradually increased. The 8th wave of monsters had reached the peak of the complete origin realm. Under Chu-Mu's sword, they were still instantly killed like ants. However, there were too many of them, and there was no end to them. The difficulty for Chu-Mu to protect the crystal sword steel increased by a lot. A figure appeared behind Chu-Mu, who was in the middle of the slaughter. It was about a meter away from him, and it was also holding a sharp sword, killing monsters. Upon closer inspection, the figure's appearance and clothes were exactly the same as Chu-Mu's. It was hard to tell if it was real or fake. Heart Sword, Second Heaven, Sword Heart Shadow. Chu Mu had already cultivated the Heart Sword Secret Record's Second Heaven, Sword Heart Shadow, to the minor completion realm. He could activate his own shadow, and it could only follow him or appear in front of him. The shadow could not be more than a meter away from him. The shadow was exactly the same as him, which meant that the shadow had his own strength. However strong he was, the shadow would be as strong as him. After cultivating the Heart Sword's secret record to the Second Heaven, Chu Mu finally realized how powerful the Heart Sword's secret record was. It was far more powerful than the Sword Shadow Kill of the First Heaven. With the Sword Heart Shadow, Chu Mu's efficiency in killing monsters had greatly increased. Wherever he went, all the monsters died like weeds. There was no one who could rival him. The crystal sword steel was firmly protected by Chu Mu, and it was not damaged at all. The 8th wave of monsters had all died. Chapter 857. The consumption of Sword Heart Shadow was several times more than Sword Shadow Kill. With Chu Mu's current reserve of Heart Sword force, he could only last for half an hour at most. Good steel should be used on the blade. A powerful ability like Sword Heart Shadow should also be used at the right time. 15 minutes later, the 9th wave of monsters appeared. This time, the monsters were different from the previous ones. They were not a large group. Only one appeared in each tunnel, and they were 4 silver-gray werewolves. The ferocious werewolves were about 3 meters tall. They had strong bodies and were extremely fast. They ran like the wind, and their eyes shone with a green light. They looked extremely ferocious. Under the coverage of his divine remembrance, Chu Mu clearly knew that the strength of these 4 werewolves had all reached the peak of the origin realm. Moreover, it was no ordinary peak. But so what? They were merely peak of the origin realm. The speed of the 4 silver-gray werewolves increased rapidly. Their speed actually surpassed the speed of sound as they rushed towards the crystal sword steel. Following that, they waved their sharp claws in the air. Silver-gray light pierced through the air like crescent moons and blasted towards the crystal sword steel. Chu Mu's body flashed as he waved his sword and shattered the sharp lights. The sword light condensed and shot out. With a poochie sound, the 4 silver-gray werewolves were sliced apart by the sword light effortlessly. However, they still rushed over as their bodies expanded. Chu Mu was shocked as he hurriedly slashed out 4 times. The 4 slashes were skillfully executed. They landed on the 4 silver-gray werewolves and immediately pushed their expanded bodies back. Boom! 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 4 shocking explosions sounded as the 4 silver-gray werewolves self-destructed. After being hit by Chu Mu's 4 sword lights, they were on the verge of death. Even if they died, they would not let Chu Mu off easily. They wanted to self-destruct and destroy the crystal sword steel. Fortunately, Chu Mu noticed it in time. Their strength was much greater than Chu Mu's. Therefore, he was able to push them back in time and prevent the crystal sword steel from being damaged. These 4 werewolves should be the 9th wave. This time, Chu Mu didn't consume too much energy, but he still hadn't fully recovered the heart sword energy he had consumed last time. He could use this time to recover as much as he could. 15 minutes passed in the blink of an eye, but the monster did not appear, which surprised Chu Mu. He continued to rest while paying attention to his surroundings. After another 15 minutes, more monsters appeared in the 4 tunnels. They were flying monsters. The appearance of the monster looked a bit like a bat. Its entire body was greenish-gray, and its flying speed was extremely fast. Its strength had even reached the entry level of the deity condensation realm. A large number of flying monsters flew over, and before they even got close, they opened their mouths and shot out translucent silver-gray light in circles, followed by a sharp sound. That sound seemed to pierce through his eardrums and penetrate his brain. His mind was shaken. Sound wave attack. Chu Mu quickly sealed his eardrums with his spiritual sense to protect his brain from the impact. A sharp sword appeared in his left hand as well. With both swords in hand, he began his massacre. Not only could the flying bats use sound wave attacks, but they could also use their small but sharp claws to attack at close range. They were so sharp that even king-grade armor would be torn apart. The entry level of the deity condensation realm was still very weak to Chu Mu. Surrounding the crystal sword steel, he swung his two swords and continuously killed the flying bat. Because the flying bats used sound waves to directly attack the crystal sword steel, Chu Mu had no choice but to expand the range of his defense. In a moment of desperation, Chu Mu would also use Sword Heart's shadow to kill. Chu Mu's defense was airtight. Any sound wave attack would be intercepted by him, and not a single one could hit the crystal sword steel. Without a doubt, this was very difficult, and it delayed Chu Mu's efficiency in killing the flying bats. However, if he didn't do this, the crystal sword steel would be damaged after all the flying bats were killed. All the flying bats were killed by Chu Mu, and the 10th wave ended. After 15 minutes of rest, the 11th wave of monsters appeared. Chu Mu didn't know how many waves there were. He could only protect the crystal sword steel and try his best not to be damaged while killing the monsters. As the strength of the monsters increased, the pressure on Chu Mu also increased. The 15th wave of monsters were stone men. Their strength was equivalent to the peak of the deity condensation realm Deshang, and they were very strong. Their bodies were very hard and difficult to destroy. They would throw boulders from afar, and they would also use their hard and thick arms to attack their targets at close range. With the combination of close and long-range attacks, Chu Mu's defense became even more difficult. On one hand, he had to shatter the boulders that came from afar, and on the other hand, he had to kill the stone men as quickly as possible to prevent them from getting close to the crystal sword steel and damaging it. It was very difficult, but Chu Mu could only grit his teeth and persevere, attacking with all his might. One sword was imbued with the profound of metal, the other with the profound of water. Both swords were imbued with the sword intent of the peak of the 9th revolution. Their sharpness was unstoppable, and none of the stone men could withstand a single sword strike. They were instantly killed. With a crack, a boulder still managed to slip through the net and hit the crystal sword steel. The boulder exploded, and a small crack appeared on the crystal sword steel. This was a terrible start. Not long after, the second boulder hit the crystal sword steel, and another crack appeared. Chu Mu was a little anxious, but he had already used all his strength. He would rather the enemy be strong and ruthless than the enemy that could be killed with a single sword strike. However, there were so many of them that he couldn't kill them all. Not only did he have to kill, he also had to guard against the enemy's attack. Most importantly, these stone men's target was not him, but the crystal sword steel. The crystal sword steel had already been hit 3 times, and 3 cracks had appeared. At this time, Chu Mu's soul trembled, and a strange feeling appeared, as if something had broken out of its cocoon. The 2 swords danced and swept in a circle, directly killing more than 10 stone men around him. Chu Mu's figure moved quickly, circling around the crystal sword steel, killing a large number of stone men and clearing an empty space. "Come out!" With a low shout, a hole suddenly appeared beside Chu Mu. That was the entrance to the beast space. Immediately after, a high-pitched voice sounded from within, like a roaring storm. A robust figure also rushed out, flying straight to the sky. Flapping its wings, it soared into the sky. A terrifying aura spread out, covering the sky and the earth. An ancient and savage aura also shrouded in all directions. Amidst the high-pitched voice, the robust figure swooped down, its sharp claws fiercely clawing downwards, immediately crushing the heads of 2 stone men. With a swing of its long tail, it directly shattered the bodies of 7 stone men like a divine whip. Bawang had broken out of its cocoon. The original Bawang had been nurtured by Chu Mu, and already had the powerful strength to resist the peak of the 7th revolution sword intent and the peak of the 7th revolution sword intent of gold. Later, after absorbing a large amount of energy, it began to transform. Bawang's bloodline had mutated many times. Once it transformed, it was the deepest level of transformation, and all its potential was fully developed. This transformation took a long time, starting from the time Chu Mu came to Heaven Wasteland domain. Until now, more than 10 years had passed. Finally, Bawang's transformation was complete, and it broke out of its cocoon. Looking at its strength, it was clear that it was now more powerful than before, at least hundreds of times stronger. Chu Mu's thoughts moved, and he communicated with Bawang. After the transformation, Bawang's strength had not only increased by leaps and bounds, but its intelligence had also greatly increased. It immediately understood Chu Mu's meaning, and immediately began to kill the stone men. Bawang's strength was more powerful than that of the stone men. Every attack it made took the lives of at least a few or even a dozen stone men. With the addition of the Overlord, Chu Mu's pressure was lessened by quite a bit, making it much easier for Chu Mu. He was also able to easily shatter the rocks that were flying towards him. Kill, kill, kill. The stone men died one after another, and turned into pieces of gravel. Bawang's figure rushed to the sky, and then turned around and swooped down. The air was ignited, and a layer of wild golden flames burned around its body. Like a falling meteor, it fell directly in the place where the stone men were the most concentrated. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The earth trembled as if the sky and earth had been turned upside down. With the tyrant fall as the center, terrifying golden wild flames swept out like a monstrous wave. In an instant, it had reached a radius of several hundred meters. All the stone golems in the area were directly shattered by the terrifying wild flames, and then melted by the high temperature. In just a moment, hundreds of stone men had died, and a large empty space was revealed. Such a powerful attack immediately suppressed the stone golem. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Chu Mu soared into the sky and slashed down with his two swords. A huge cross-shaped sword light tore through the sky. The golden and light blue sword light intersected, and the power was even more powerful. The cross-shaped sword light fell, and dozens of stone men were killed. The scene was smaller than the one caused by Bawang, but the power was not inferior at all. With the tacit cooperation between man and beast, not a single stone could hit the crystal sword's steel. All the stone men were dead. After a quarter of an hour of rest, Chu Mu recovered his strength while carefully sizing up the transformed Bawang. Its body was bigger than before, and it looked more tyrannical. Its appearance was also more overbearing and ferocious. Its pair of fleshy wings were usually closed, but when they were opened, they were even bigger than its body. The edges of the fleshy wings were serrated and very sharp. Moreover, Bawang's tail was longer, and the tip was sharper. After a quarter of an hour, the 16th wave of monsters also appeared. The earth shook, indicating that this wave of monsters was large and heavy. One by one, the giant beasts rushed over, as if they wanted to trample the earth into pieces. Each of the giant beasts that rushed over emitted powerful energy wave. As they roared, their auras were extremely imposing. The bursts of auras caused strong storms, forming cyclones that whistled in all directions. That aura was really like that of a magnificent army with thousands of men and horses. Bawang, who was crawling on the ground, seemed to have been provoked. It stood up and let out an earth-shattering roar towards the giant beasts that were rushing over, as if it was declaring war. Each of these giant beasts had the strength of a swordsman at the great circle of the god-congealing realm. At a glance, they were densely packed. Chapter 858. Chu Mu was glad that Bawang had finished transforming in time. Otherwise, he didn't know if he could kill all the stone men before the crystal steel was destroyed. Even if he could, the crystal steel would have been damaged a lot. The situation was not good. After Bawang finished transforming, he cooperated with Chu Mu to kill all the stone men. Because of Bawang's cooperation, Chu Mu didn't have to face so much pressure in the 16th wave of giant beasts. These giant beasts only had one method of attack, which was to use their short and thick legs to run as fast as they could. With their huge bodies and astonishing weight, once they hit their target, they would cause terrible damage. These giant beasts had a thick layer of horn on their heads like a shield, which could provide them with shocking protection. It wasn't suitable to fight these giant beasts head-on. With 2 swords in hand, Chu-Mu quickly moved. With the support of the peak 9th Revolution sword intent, the 8-sided Desolate Sky sword was incomparably sharp. The horn on the giant beast's head couldn't block it and was easily cut open. Compared to Chu-Mu's agile fighting style, Bawang was the complete opposite. He was very violent. Bawang's bloodline had mutated many times. In terms of strength, his body's defense was also very shocking. His speed was also unbelievably fast. With all these factors added together, Bawang's charging power was terrifying. Under the direct impact, the giant beast's head was directly smashed into pieces by the Overlord's charge. It caved in and blood and brain matter burst out. It was extremely brutal and bloody as it was forcefully smashed to death by the Overlord. After smashing another giant beast to death, Bawang roared and attacked again. This time, Chu-Mu was guarding 2 passages. Bawang was also guarding 2 passages. At present, it seemed that they could completely defend. The giant beast's corpse would also provide some protection and prevent other giant beasts from charging. Chu-Mu made good use of this. He wandered among the giant beasts and killed them continuously. It was very ingenious. What he was most worried about were monsters that were capable of both long-range and close-range attack. If that were the case, he would have to deal with both sides and protect the crystal sword steel. It would be too difficult and stressful. Giant beasts like this only knew how to charge. There was nothing to be afraid of. The crystal sword steel was not damaged at all. The 16th wave of giant beasts were all killed by Chu-Mu and Bawang. Once again, they rested for a quarter of an hour. This time, Chu-Mu had consumed a lot of energy. Therefore, he took out some medicinal pills to help him recover. 15 minutes later, the 17th wave of monsters appeared. Chu-Mu and Bawang teamed up once again. They almost fell into a bitter battle, but in the end they killed all the monsters. This battle had exhausted them to the point of choking. You have half an hour to rest. After half an hour, the final wave of attacks will begin. The old voice suddenly reminded Chu-Mu. Half an hour. Chu-Mu's eyes narrowed. The words half an hour and final wave made Chu-Mu vigilant. He seized the time to rest and recover all the energy he had consumed. Looking at the crystal sword steel with a few cracks, Chu-Mu had a flash of inspiration. He quickly walked around the crystal sword steel and set up defensive and counterattack seals. There was too little time, so Chu-Mu was unable to set them up. He could only set up 1 layer. He couldn't help but secretly curse himself for not thinking about this before. He was preparing for the final wave of attacks. Half an hour was actually very short. Everything around the 4 passages disappeared, turning into an empty space. The final wave of monsters appeared. It was the army. Seeing this wave of monsters, Chu-Mu thought of the word army in his heart. Figures quickly appeared. They were infantry soldiers wearing full body armor. Their appearances could not be seen. They held shields in one hand and long sabers in the other. They stood in formation, and their auras were condensed into one as they pressed forward. Sword-shield soldiers. There were sword-shield soldiers in all directions. There were 10 layers in total, and there were more than 1,000 of them. Every one of them was at the peak of the God Condensation Realm. Although they were only at the peak of the God Condensation Realm, they were still very powerful. After the 10 layers of sword-shield soldiers, there were 3 layers of archers. They were also at the peak of the God Condensation Realm. Following them were heavily armored knights. They were riding fierce beasts that looked like large horses. In the north, which was directly opposite of Chu-Mu, a carriage appeared behind the knight. Sitting on it was a hazy figure that couldn't be seen clearly. Vaguely, Chu-Mu had a feeling that the figure on the carriage was definitely the most important one in this wave of monsters. the sword-shield soldiers finally stopped below the platform. Their uniform movements made a shocking visual impact. Soon after, the figure on the carriage waved the flag in his hand. The archers immediately nocked their arrows and aimed at the crystal sword steel. Sharp sonic booms resounded as arrows pierced through the sky. They were densely packed like a swarm of locusts. Every arrow contained a terrifying power. Once all of them hit the crystal sword steel, there was no doubt that the crystal sword steel would be destroyed. No matter what, he could not let the arrows hit the crystal sword steel. Chumu's figure moved. He held two swords in his hands. His figure was like a swallow as he quickly circled around the crystal sword steel. He waved his swords, and a sword light bloomed, directly killing the arrows. At the same time, Bawang roared and charged at the sword-shield soldiers at several times the speed of sound. He was about to attack. The figure on the carriage lightly waved the flag. The sword-shield soldiers immediately moved. They avoided Bawang's attack and surrounded Bawang at the same time. They formed a unique formation to trap Bawang, making it difficult for Bawang to display his strength. After destroying all the arrows, Chumu was shocked when he saw Bawang being surrounded. With Bawang's current strength, it would not be difficult for him to kill a normal god condensation realm extreme swordsman. However, he was not even able to kill a single sword shield soldier. Instead, he was trapped and had a few shallow wounds on his body. The second wave of arrows came. Chumu could only protect the crystal sword steel and destroy the arrows. He was unable to kill the enemy. A large group of sword-shield soldiers began to advance. They charged at the crystal sword steel. They raised their swords and were about to attack the crystal sword steel. After destroying the arrows, the sword light slashed through the air towards the sword-shield soldiers on the ground. The figure on the carriage waved the flag again. The sword-shield soldiers quickly scattered, making the sword light miss. These sword-shield soldiers, archers, and so on were all under the command of the figure on the carriage. Kill it! With this thought, Chumu knew what to do. He used Sword Heart's shadow and forced the sword-shield soldiers to retreat. As for Chumu, other than destroying the arrows, he continued to lay down seals around the crystal sword steel. Dividing his attention to lay down seals was less efficient, but he could only do so for now. Although Bawang was trapped, he was not in any immediate danger. Finally, after Chumu laid down a total of 5 layers of defense and counterattack seals on the crystal sword steel, he used Dashang's burning blood transformation. His blood essence collided and burned. The tyrannical power was like a flood of magma after a volcanic eruption. It rushed through his body. The blood-red flames rushed out of his body and burned fiercely. His eyes were also covered with a layer of blood-red color, looking very demonic. With a hong sound, his muscles vibrated, and a powerful force stacked on top of each other, striking the air and creating a powerful propelling force. In an instant, Chumu exploded with 10 times the speed of sound. He even controlled the recoil of the air to sweep away the arrows that were once again shooting towards him, forcing a sword-shield soldier to retreat. With an unimaginable speed, he crossed several hundred meters in an instant. Under Chumu's deliberate control, the tyrannical chi spread out and attacked the sword-shield soldiers below, causing their formation to be in chaos. Chumu's actions were within the enemy's expectations. However, they did not expect him to be so fast. With a wave of the flag, countless arrows shot through the air, wanting to turn Chumu into a beehive. His figure flickered as Chumu used the profound of space that had reached the limit of the third revolution. He disappeared in an instant. When he reappeared, he was several hundred meters away, close to the figure on the carriage. Each of the wasps was the size of a fist. Their bodies were completely black and shone with a cold metallic luster. They were so dense that they blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Chumu's eyes suddenly turned dark. The speed of the black poisonous bee was extremely fast. It flew over, and its sharp poisonous stinger flickered with an astonishing luster, causing people to feel a chill in their hearts. Using the profound of space once again, Chu Mu took a step forward in the void. Using the inverse space step, he appeared behind Poison Bee and rushed towards the figure on the carriage. Having lost their target, Poison Bee turned around and rushed towards Chu Mu again. Their speed was shockingly fast. After several flashes, Chu Mu arrived in front of the carriage. His figure was shrouded in darkness, and it was impossible to see him clearly. Suddenly, the black figure exploded, and its eyes emitted a shocking light. Two beams of divine light shot into Chu Mu's eyes and entered his mental world. The flag in its hand turned into a sharp sword that pierced through the air. It was completely out of Chu Mu's expectations. Under normal circumstances, Chu Mu would not be able to escape death. However, he possessed the power of his divine sense, and it was very powerful. He immediately resisted the attack of the opponent's eye technique. His two swords danced, one blocking the opponent's sword while the other counterattacked. In an instant, the three styles of heavenly desolation were used. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The three swords suppressed the opponent and forced him to take it head-on. After a slight pause, the first and second styles of heavenly desolation were used. Kill. Under Chu Mu's sword, this black figure was unable to block or evade. It was directly split apart, and blood splattered across the sky. At the same time, the swarm of Poison Bee flew over and surrounded Chu Mu. The crystal sword steel was attacked by arrows and sword shield soldiers. Layer after layer of seals were broken, and only the last layer was left. With the death of their commander, the sword shield soldiers' formation was in chaos. Bawang rushed forward and killed many sword shield soldiers. He immediately flew into the sky and arrived at the crystal sword steel, shattering the arrows. Turning around, he waved his sword. Sword light descended like a storm, killing countless poison bees. Chu Mu continuously used the inverse space step and rushed towards the crystal sword steel without caring about the consumption. The last layer of seals was broken, and the crystal sword steel began to receive attacks. Cracks appeared one after another, and the situation became very dangerous.